Chapter 5, What Books and Burials Tell Us. Mary in the Library. As the bell rang, the teacher asked the students to follow him because they were going to the library for the first time. When Mary stepped inside, she found that the library was much larger than their classroom, and there were so many shelves, all full of books. In one corner was a cupboard filled with large, old volumes. Seeing her trying to open the cupboard, the teacher said, "That cupboard has very special books on different religions. Did you know that we have a set of the Vedas?" "What are the Vedas?" Mary wondered. Let us find out.
Image summary. This is a portrait of Mary, who is introduced in the text. She is a student who is visiting the library for the first time and is curious about the Vedas.
One of the oldest books in the world. You may have heard about the Vedas. There are 4 of them: the Rigveda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda. The oldest Veda is the Rigveda, composed about 3,500 years ago. The Rigveda includes more than 1,000 hymns called sukta or well said. These hymns are in praise of various gods and goddesses. 3 gods are especially important: Agni, the god of fire, Indra, a warrior god, and Soma, a plant from which a special drink was prepared. These hymns were composed by sages, rishis. Priests taught students to recite and memorize each syllable, word, and sentence, bit by bit, with great care. Most of the hymns were composed, taught, and learnt by men. A few were composed by women. The Rigveda is in Old or Vedic Sanskrit, which is different from the Sanskrit you learn in school these days. Sanskrit and other languages. Sanskrit is part of a family of languages known as Indo-European. Some Indian languages such as Assamese, Gujarati, Hindi, Kashmiri, and Sindhi. Asian languages such as Persian and many European languages such as English, French, German, Greek, Italian, and Spanish belong to this family. They are called a family because they originally had words in common. Take the words matter, Sanskrit, ma, Hindi, and mother, English. Do you notice any similarities? Other languages used in the subcontinent belong to different families. For instance, those used in the Northeast belong to the Tibeto-Burman family. Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, and Malayalam belong to the Dravidian family, and the languages spoken in Jharkhand and parts of central India belong to the Austroasiatic family. List the languages you have heard about and try and identify the families to which they belong. The books we use are written and printed. The Rigveda was recited and heard rather than read. It was written down several centuries after it was first composed and printed less than 200 years ago. How historians study the Rigveda. Historians, like archaeologists, find out about the past, but in addition to material remains, they examine written sources as well. Let us see how they study the Rigveda. Some of the hymns in the Rigveda are in the form of dialogues. This is part of one such hymn, a dialogue between a sage named Vishvamitra and 2 rivers, Beas and Sutlej, that were worshipped as goddesses. Find the rivers on map 1, page 2, then read on.
Figure summary. The image shows a page from a Rigveda manuscript. The manuscript, written on birch bark, was discovered in Kashmir. It was used approximately a century and a half ago to create one of the earliest printed versions of the Rigveda, along with an English translation. Currently, it is housed in a library located in Pune, Maharashtra.
Vishvamitra and the rivers. Vishvamitra, O rivers, come down from the mountains like 2 swift horses, like 2 shining cows that lick their calves. You move like chariots to the sea, through the power of Indra. You are full of water and wish to unite with one another. The rivers, we, who are full of water, move along the path the gods have made for us. Once we start flowing, we cannot be stopped. Why do you pray to us, O sage? Vishvamitra, O sisters, please listen to me, the singer who has come from a distance with his chariots and carts. Let your waters not rise above our axles so that we can cross safely. The rivers, we will listen to your prayers so that you can cross safely. Historians point out that this hymn was composed in the area where these rivers flow. They also suggest that the sage lived in a society where horses and cows were valued animals. That is why the rivers are compared to horses and cows. Do you think chariots were also important? Give reasons for your answer. Read the verses and find out what are the modes of transport that are mentioned. Other rivers, especially the Indus and its other tributaries, and the Sarasvati, are also named in the hymns. The Ganga and Yamuna are named only once. Look at Map 1, page 2, and list 5 rivers that are not mentioned in the Rigveda. Cattle, horses, and chariots. There are many prayers in the Rigveda for cattle, children, especially sons, and horses. Horses were yoked to chariots that were used in battles, which were fought to capture cattle. Battles were also fought for land, which was important for pasture, and for growing hardy crops that ripened quickly, such as barley. Some battles were fought for water and to capture people. Some of the wealth that was obtained was kept by the leaders, some was given to the priests, and the rest was distributed amongst the people. Some wealth was used for the performance of yajnas or sacrifices in which offerings were made into the fire. These were meant for gods and goddesses. Offerings could include ghee, grain, and in some cases, animals. Most men took part in these wars. There was no regular army, but there were assemblies where people met and discussed matters of war and peace. They also chose leaders, who were often brave and skillful warriors. Words to describe people. There are several ways of describing people in terms of the work they do, the language they speak, the place they belong to, their family, their communities, and cultural practices. Let us see some of the words used to describe people found in the Rigveda. There are 2 groups who are described in terms of their work. The priests, sometimes called Brahmins, who performed various rituals, and the Rajas. These Rajas were not like the ones you will be learning about later. They did not have capital cities, palaces, or armies, nor did they collect taxes. Generally, sons did not automatically succeed fathers as Rajas. Read the previous section once more and see whether you can find out what the Rajas did. 2 words were used to describe the people or the community as a whole. One was the word jana, which we still use in Hindi and other languages. The other was vish. The word Vaisya comes from vish. You will learn more about this in Chapter 6. Several vish or jana are mentioned by name. So we find reference to the Puru jana or vish, the Bharata jana or vish, the Yadu jana or vish, and so on. Do any of these names sound familiar? Sometimes, the people who composed the hymns described themselves as Aryas and called their opponents Dasas or Dasyas. These were people who did not perform sacrifices and probably spoke different languages. Later, the term Dasa and the feminine Dasi came to mean slave. Slaves were women and men who were often captured in war. They were treated as the property of their owners, who could make them do whatever work they wanted. While the Rigveda was being composed in the northwest of the subcontinent, there were other developments elsewhere. Let us look at some of these. Silent Sentinels, the story of the megaliths. Look at the illustration on the next page. These stone boulders are known as megaliths, literally big stones. These were carefully arranged by people and were used to mark burial sites. The practice of erecting megaliths began about 3,000 years ago and was prevalent throughout the Deccan, South India, in the Northeast, and Kashmir. Some important megalithic sites are shown on Map 2, page 14. While some megaliths can be seen on the surface, other megalithic burials are often underground. Sometimes, archaeologists find a circle of stone boulders or a single large stone standing on the ground. These are the only indications that there are burials beneath. This type of megalith is known as a cyst. Some cysts, like the one shown here, have portholes which could be used as an entrance. There were several things that people did to make megaliths. We have made a list here. Try and arrange them in the correct order: digging pits in the earth, transporting stones, breaking boulders, placing stones in position, finding suitable stone, shaping stones, burying the dead. All these burials have some common features. Generally, the dead were buried with distinctive pots, which are called black and red ware. Also found are tools and weapons of iron and sometimes skeletons of horses, horse equipment, and ornaments of stone and gold. Was iron used in the Harappan cities?
Image summary. The image shows a megalith known as a cyst. Some cysts have portholes that could serve as entrances. These megaliths are burial sites, marked by arrangements of large stones. Archaeologists sometimes find circles of stone boulders or single large stones indicating underground burials. Burials typically contain distinctive pots known as black and red ware, along with iron tools, weapons, horse skeletons, horse equipment, and ornaments of stone and gold. Iron equipment found from megalithic burials is shown in the image. There are horse equipment, axes, and a dagger. It can be inferred that iron was used for making tools and equipment during the megalithic period. The horse equipment suggests the importance of horses during that era, while the axes and dagger indicate the presence of warfare or hunting practices. Iron equipment found from megalithic burials is shown in the image. The image shows a dagger. The dagger is a type of iron equipment found in megalithic burials.
Finding out about social differences. Archaeologists think that objects found with a skeleton probably belong to the dead person. Sometimes, more objects are found in one grave than in another. Find Brahmagiri on Map 2, page 14. Here, one skeleton was buried with 33 gold beads, 2 stone beads, 4 copper bangles, and 1 conch shell. Other skeletons have only a few pots. These finds suggest that there was some difference in status amongst the people who were buried. Some were rich, others poor, some chiefs, others followers. Were some burial spots meant for certain families? Sometimes, megaliths contain more than one skeleton. These indicate that people, perhaps belonging to the same family, were buried in the same place, though not at the same time. The bodies of those who died later were brought into the grave through the poreholes. Stone circles or boulders placed on the surface probably served as signposts to find the burial site, so that people could return to the same place whenever they wanted to. A special burial at Anamgyan. Find Anamgyan on Map 2, page 14. It is a site on the river God, a tributary of the Bhima. It was occupied between 3,600 and 2,700 years ago. Here, adults were generally buried in the ground, laid out straight, with the head towards the north. Sometimes burials were within the houses. Vessels that probably contained food and water were placed with the dead. One man was found buried in a large, 4-legged clay jar in the courtyard of a 5-roomed house, one of the largest houses at the site, in the center of the settlement. This house also had a granary. The body was placed in a cross-legged position. Do you think this was the body of a chief? Give reasons for your answer. What skeletal studies tell us? It is easy to make out the skeleton of a child from its small size. However, there are no major differences in the bones of a girl and a boy. Can we make out whether a skeleton was that of a man or a woman? Sometimes, people decide on the basis of what is found with the skeleton. For instance, if a skeleton is found with jewelry, it is sometimes thought to be that of a woman. However, there are problems with this. Often, men also wore ornaments. A better way of figuring out the sex of a skeleton is to look at the bone structure. The hip, or the pelvic area of women, is generally larger to enable childbearing. These distinctions are based on modern skeletal studies. About 2,000 years ago, there was a famous physician named Charaka who wrote a book on medicine known as the Charaka Samhita. There he states that the human body has 360 bones. This is a much larger number than the 200 bones that are recognized in modern anatomy. Charaka arrived at this figure by counting the teeth, joints, and cartilage. How do you think he found out about the human body in such great detail? Occupations at Anamgyan. Archaeologists have found seeds of wheat, barley, rice, pulses, millets, peas, and sesame. Bones of a number of animals, many bearing cut marks that show they may have been used as food, have also been found. These include cattle, buffalo, goat, sheep, dog, horse, ass, pig, samuhar, spotted deer, blackbuck, antelope, hare, and mongoose, besides birds, crocodile, turtle, crab, and fish. There is evidence that fruits such as burr, amla, jamun, dates, and a variety of berries were collected. Use this evidence to list the possible occupations of the people at Anamgyan. Elsewhere, find China in your atlas. Around 3,500 years ago, we find some of the first evidence of writing in China. These writings were on animal bones. These are called oracle bones because they were used to predict the future. Kings got scribes to write questions on the bones. Would they win battles? Would the harvest be good? Would they have sons? The bones were then put into the fire, and they cracked because of the heat. Then fortune tellers studied these cracks and tried to predict the future. As you may expect, they sometimes made mistakes. These kings lived in palaces in cities. They amassed vast quantities of wealth, including large, elaborately decorated bronze vessels. However, they did not know the use of iron. List one difference between the Raja of the Rigveda and these kings.
Image summary. The image shows examples of early Chinese writing on oracle bones. These bones were utilized for divination, with kings posing questions to scribes and the bones being heated until cracks formed. These cracks were then interpreted to predict future events. The image shows the complexity of the writing system used.
Imagine. You live in an Amgion 3,000 years ago, and the chief has died last night. Today, your parents are preparing for the burial. Describe the scene, including how food is being prepared for the funeral. What do you think would be offered? Beginning of the composition of the Vedas, about 3,500 years ago. Beginning of the building of megaliths, about 3,000 years ago. Settlement at an Amgion, between 3,600 and 2,700 years ago. Charaka, about 2,000 years ago. Let's recall. 1. Match the columns. Sukta stone boulder chariots sacrifice yajna. Well said. Dasa, used in battles. Megalith slave 2. Complete the sentences. A. Slaves were used for. B. Megaliths are found in. C. Stone circles or boulders on the surface were used to. D. Portholes were used for. E. People at an Amgion 8. Let's discuss. 3. In what ways are the books we read today different from the Rigveda? 4. What kind of evidence from burials do archaeologists use to find out whether there were social differences amongst those who were buried? 5. In what ways do you think that the life of a Raja was different from that of a Dasa or Dast? Let's do. 6. Find out whether your school library has a collection of books on religion and list the names of 5 books from this collection. 7. Write down a short poem or song that you have memorized. Did you hear or read the poem or song? How did you learn it by heart? 8. In the Rigveda, people were described in terms of the work they did and the languages they spoke. In the table below, fill in the names of 6 people you know, choosing 3 men and 3 women. For each of them, mention the work they do and the language they speak. Would you like to add anything else to the description? Chapter 6. Kingdoms, Kings, and an Early Republic.
Unlabeled summary. The table is designed to collect information about 6 individuals, specifically 3 men and 3 women. For each person, the table requires their name, the work they perform, the language they speak, and any additional descriptive details. This structure facilitates a comparative analysis of individuals based on their occupation and linguistic background, allowing for further qualitative observations. Image summary. This is a portrait of a young boy. He is wearing a white shirt and a blue vest. He is sitting down and has his hand raised to his face, as if he is thinking. The image likely accompanies the adjacent text about choosing leaders and rulers.
Election day. Shankaran woke up to see his grandparents all ready to go and vote. They wanted to be the first to reach the polling booth. Why, Shankaran wanted to know, were they so excited? Somewhat impatiently, his grandfather explained. We can choose our own rulers today. How some men became rulers. Choosing leaders or rulers by voting is something that has become common during the last 50 years or so. How did men become rulers in the past? Some of the Rajas we read about in Chapter 5 were probably chosen by the Jana, the people. But around 3,000 years ago, we find some changes taking place in the ways in which Rajas were chosen. Some men now became recognized as Rajas by performing very big sacrifices. The Ashwamedha or horse sacrifice was one such ritual. A horse was let loose to wander freely, and it was guarded by the Raja's men. If the horse wandered into the kingdoms of other Rajas and they stopped it, they had to fight. If they allowed the horse to pass, it meant that they accepted that the Raja who wanted to perform the sacrifice was stronger than them. These Rajas were then invited to the sacrifice, which was performed by specially trained priests who were rewarded with gifts. The Raja who organized the sacrifice was recognized as being very powerful, and all those who came brought gifts for him. The Raja was a central figure in these rituals. He often had a special seat, a throne, or a tiger skin. His charioteer, who was his companion in the battlefield and witnessed his exploits, chanted tales of his glory. His relatives, especially his wives and sons, had to perform a variety of minor rituals. The other Rajas were simply spectators who had to sit and watch the performance of the sacrifice. Priests performed the rituals, including the sprinkling of sacred water on the king. The ordinary people, the Ush or Vaisya, also brought gifts. However, some people, such as those who were regarded as Sudras by the priests, were excluded from many rituals. Make a list of all those who would be present at the sacrifice. Which are the categories that are described in terms of their occupation? Varnas. We have many books that were composed in North India, especially in the areas drained by the Ganga and the Yamuna during this period. These books are often called later Vedic because they were composed after the Rigveda, about which you learnt in Chapter 5. These include the Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharvaveda, as well as other books. These were composed by priests and described how rituals were to be performed. They also contained rules about society. There were several different groups in society at this time: priests and warriors, farmers, herders, traders, craftspersons, laborers, fishing folk, and forest people. Some priests and warriors were rich, as were some farmers and traders. Others, including many herders, craftspersons, laborers, fishing folk, and hunters and gatherers, were poor. The priests divided people into 4 groups called Varnas. According to them, each Varna had a different set of functions. The first Varna was that of the Brahmin. Brahmins were expected to study and teach the Vedas, perform sacrifices, and receive gifts. In the second place were the rulers, also known as Kshatriyas. They were expected to fight battles and protect people. Third were the Vish, or the Vaisyas. They were expected to be farmers, herders, and traders. Both the Kshatriyas and the Vaisyas could perform sacrifices. Last were the Sudras, who had to serve the other 3 groups and could not perform any rituals. Often, women were also grouped with the Sudras. Both women and Sudras were not allowed to study the Vedas. The priests also said that these groups were decided on the basis of birth. For example, if one's father and mother were Brahmins, one would automatically become a Brahmin, and so on. Later, they classified some people as untouchable. These included some craftspersons, hunters, and gatherers, as well as people who helped perform burials and cremations. The priests said that contact with these groups was polluting. Many people did not accept the system of Varna laid down by the Brahmins. Some kings thought they were superior to the priests. Others felt that birth could not be a basis for deciding which Varna people belonged to. Besides, some people felt that there should be no differences amongst people based on occupation. Others felt that everybody should be able to perform rituals, and others condemned the practice of untouchability. Also, there were many areas in the subcontinent, such as the Northeast, where social and economic differences were not very sharp, and where the influence of the priests was limited. Why did people oppose the system of Varnas? Painted gray ware. Plates and bowls are the most common vessels made out of painted gray ware. These are extremely fine to touch, with a nice, smooth surface. Perhaps these were used on special occasions, for important people, and to serve special food. Janapadas. The Rajas who performed these big sacrifices were now recognized as being Rajas of Janapadas rather than Janas. The word Janapada literally means the land where the Jana set its foot and settled down. Some important Janapadas are shown on Map 4, page 57. Archaeologists have excavated a number of settlements in these Janapadas, such as Puranakila in Delhi, Hastinapura near Meerut, and Atranjikura. Near Etta, the last 2 are in Uttar Pradesh. They found that people lived in huts and kept cattle as well as other animals. They also grew a variety of crops: rice, wheat, barley, pulses, sugarcane, sesame, and mustard. Is there a crop in this list that was not mentioned in Chapter 4? They made earthen pots. Some of these were gray in color, others were red. One special type of pottery found at these sites is known as painted gray ware. As is obvious from the name, these gray pots had painted designs, usually simple lines and geometric patterns.
Image summary. This is an image of painted gray ware pottery. These bowls and plates were common vessels. They are extremely fine to touch, with a smooth surface. They were used on special occasions for important people and to serve special food.
Mahajanapadas. About 2,500 years ago, some Janapadas became more important than others and were known as Mahajanapadas. Some of these are shown on Map 4. Most Mahajanapadas had a capital city. Many of these were fortified. This means that huge walls of wood, brick, or stone were built around them. Forts were probably built because people were afraid of attacks from other kings and needed protection. It is also likely that some rulers wanted to show how rich and powerful they were by building really large, tall, and impressive walls around their cities. Also in this way, the land and the people living inside the fortified area could be controlled more easily by the king. Building such huge walls required a great deal of planning. Thousands, if not lakhs of bricks or stones had to be prepared. This in turn meant enormous labor, provided possibly by thousands of men, women, and children, and resources had to be found for all of this. The new Rajas now began maintaining armies. Soldiers were paid regular salaries and maintained by the king throughout the year. Some payments were probably made using punch-marked coins. See the illustration on page 92. You will read more about these coins in Chapter 9. List 2 ways in which the Rajas of the Mahajanapadas were different from those mentioned in the Rigveda.
Map 4 Summary. The image is a map depicting important Janapadas, Mahajanapadas, and cities. The map shows the geographical locations of various significant places, including Gandhara, Kuru, Panchala, Kosala, Vaishali, Vaji, Magadha, Anga, Avanti, and others. The map provides a visual representation of the geographical distribution and relative importance of these ancient political and urban centers. The placement of the Janapadas and Mahajanapadas suggests their influence and control over specific regions. The map indicates the presence of multiple important Janapadas and Mahajanapadas across the region, highlighting the diverse political landscape of the time. Figure summary. The image depicts the remains of a fortification wall constructed of brick, located near present-day Allahabad in Uttar Pradesh. The wall was likely built approximately 25 centuries ago. Fortification walls were constructed as a defense against attacks from other kings and to showcase the wealth and power of the rulers. The construction of such walls required considerable planning and resources, involving extensive labor and materials.
Taxes. As the rulers of the Mahajanapadas were A. building huge forts, B. maintaining big armies, they needed more resources, and they needed officials to collect these. So, instead of depending on occasional gifts brought by people, as in the case of the Raja of the Janapadas, they started collecting regular taxes. Taxes on crops were the most important. This was because most people were farmers. Usually, the tax was fixed at 1 divided by 6 to the power of th of what was produced. This was known as bhaga, or a share. There were taxes on craftspersons as well. These could have been in the form of labor. For example, a weaver or a smith may have had to work for a day every month. For the king, herders were also expected to pay taxes in the form of animals and animal produce. There were also taxes on goods that were bought and sold. Through trade, and hunters and gatherers also had to provide forest produce to the Raja. What do you think would have been provided by hunters and gatherers? Changes in agriculture. There were 2 major changes in agriculture around this time. One was the growing use of iron plowshares. This meant that heavy, clayey soil could be turned over better than with a wooden plowshare, so that more grain could be produced. Second, people began transplanting paddy. This meant that instead of scattering seed on the ground from which plants would sprout, saplings were grown and then planted in the fields. This led to increased production, as many more plants survived. However, it was back-breaking work. Generally, slave men and women, dasas and dasis, and landless agricultural laborers, kamakaras, had to do this work. Can you think why kings would encourage these changes? A closer look, A. Magadha. Find Magadha on Map 4, page 57. Magadha became the most important Mahajanapada in about 200 years. Many rivers such as the Ganga and Sun flowed through Magadha. This was important for A. transport, B. water supplies, C. making the land fertile. Parts of Magadha were forested. Elephants, which lived in the forest, could be captured and trained for the army. Forests also provided wood for building houses, carts, and chariots. Besides, there were iron ore mines in the region that could be tapped to make strong tools and weapons. Magadha had 2 very powerful rulers, Bimbisara and Ajatasattu, who used all possible means to conquer other Janapadas. Mahapadmananda was another important ruler. He extended his control up to the northwest part of the subcontinent. Rajagriha, present-day Rajgir, in Bihar, was the capital of Magadha for several years. Later the capital was shifted to Pataliputra, present-day Patna. More than 2,300 years ago, a ruler named Alexander, who lived in Macedonia in Europe, wanted to become a world conqueror. Of course, he didn't conquer the world, but did conquer parts of Egypt and West Asia, and came to the Indian subcontinent, reaching up to the banks of the Bias. When he wanted to march further eastwards, his soldiers refused. They were scared, as they had heard that the rulers of India had vast armies of foot soldiers, chariots, and elephants. In what ways were these armies different from those described in the Rigveda? A closer look. Vajji. While Magadha became a powerful kingdom, Vajji, with its capital at Vaishali, Bihar, was under a different form of government known as Gana or Sangha. In a Gana or a Sangha there were not one, but many rulers. Sometimes, even when thousands of men ruled together, each one was known as a Raja. These Rajas performed rituals together. They also met in assemblies and decided what had to be done and how, through discussion and debate. For example, if they were attacked by an enemy, they met to discuss what should be done to meet the threat. However, women, dasas, and kamakaras could not participate in these assemblies. Both the Buddha and Mahavira, about whom you will read in Chapter 7, belonged to Ganas or Sanghas. Some of the most vivid descriptions of life in the Sanghas can be found in Buddhist books. Gana is used for a group that has many members. Sangha means organization or association. This is an account of the Vajjis from the Digha Nikaya, a famous Buddhist book which contains some of the speeches of the Buddha. These were written down about 2,300 years ago. Ajatasattu and the Vajjis Ajatasattu wanted to attack the Vajjis. He sent his minister, named Vasakara, to the Buddha to get his advice on the matter. The Buddha asked whether the Vajjis met frequently, in full assemblies. When he heard that they did, he replied that the Vajjis would continue to prosper as long as they held full and frequent public assemblies. They met and acted together. They followed established rules. They respected, supported, and listened to elders. Vajji women were not held by force or captured. Chaityas, local shrines, were maintained in both towns and villages. Wise saints, who followed different beliefs, were respected and allowed to enter and leave the country freely. In what ways was the Vajji Sangha different from the other Mahajanapadas? Try and list at least 3 differences. Rajas of powerful kingdoms tried to conquer the Sanghas. Nevertheless, these lasted for a very long time, till about 1,500 years ago, when the last of the Ganas or Sanghas were conquered by the Gupta rulers, about whom you will read in Chapter 11. Elsewhere, find Greece and Athens in your atlas. Around 2,500 years ago, the people of Athens set up a form of government, which was called a democracy, which lasted for about 200 years. All free men over the age of 30 were recognized as full citizens. There was an assembly that met at least 40 times a year to decide on important matters. All citizens could attend these meetings. Appointments for many positions were made through lottery. All those who wanted to be chosen gave in their names, and then some were selected through lottery. Citizens were expected to serve in the army and the navy. However, women were not considered citizens. Also, many foreigners, who lived and worked in Athens as merchants and craftspersons, did not have rights as citizens. Besides, there were several thousand slaves in Athens who worked in mines, fields, households, and workshops. They too were not treated as citizens. Do you think this was a true democracy? Imagine you are peeping through a crack in the walls of the assembly of Vaishali, where a meeting is in progress to discuss ways to deal with an attack by the king of Magadha. Describe what you might hear. Let's recall. 1. State whether true or false. A. Rajas who let the Ashvarmedha horse pass through their lands were invited to the sacrifice. B. The charioteer sprinkled sacred water on the king. C. Archaeologists have found palaces in the settlements of the Janapadas. D. Pots to store grain were made out of painted gray ware. E. Many cities in Mahajanapadas were fortified. Some important dates. New kinds of Rajas, about 3,000 years ago Mahajanapadas. About 2,500 years ago Alexander's invasion, composition of the Digha Nikaya. About 2,300 years ago end of the Ganas or Sanghas. About 1,500 years ago. 2. Fill in the chart given below with the terms. Hunter-gatherers, farmers, traders, craftspersons, herders. Those who paid taxes. 3. Who were the groups who could not participate in the assemblies of the Ganas?
Image summary. This is a chart that shows the relationship between the Raja of the Mahajanapada and those who paid taxes. The chart has a central node representing the Raja of the Mahajanapada, with several other nodes branching out from it. These other nodes likely represent different groups of people who were responsible for paying taxes to the Raja. The chart illustrates that the Raja was at the center of the system, and that various groups contributed to the kingdom through taxation. It suggests that the Raja's power and wealth were dependent on the contributions of these different groups.
Let's discuss. 4. Why did the Rajas of Manajarapadas build forts? 5. In what ways are present-day elections different from the ways in which rulers were chosen in Janapadas? Let's do. 6. Find the state in which you live in the political map on page 136. Were there any Janapadas in your state? If yes, name them. If not, name the Janapadas that would have been the closest to your state and mention whether they were to the east, west, north, or south. 7. Find out whether any of the groups mentioned in answer 2 pay taxes today. 8. Find out whether the groups mentioned in answer 3 have voting rights at present. Chapter 7. New questions and ideas. Anagha's school trip. Anagha's school trip. This was the first time Anagha was going on a school trip. They boarded the train from Pune in Maharashtra late at night to go all the way to Varanasi in Uttar Pradesh. Her mother, who came to see her off at the station, told the teacher, "Do tell the children about the Buddha and take them to see Sarnath as well."
Image summary. The image shows a girl with braided hair, wearing a green sweater with cartoon characters on it. She is standing in front of a staircase. The image provides a visual element to the surrounding text content.
The story of the Buddha. Siddhartha, also known as Gautama, the founder of Buddhism, was born about 2,500 years ago. This was a time of rapid change in the lives of people. As you saw in Chapter 6, some kings in the Mahajanapadas were growing more powerful. New cities were developing, and life was changing in the villages as well. See Chapter 10. Many thinkers were trying to understand these changes in society. They also wanted to try and find out the true meaning of life. The Buddha belonged to a small Gana known as the Sakya Gana and was a Kshatriya. When he was a young man, he left the comforts of his home in search of knowledge. He wandered for several years, meeting and holding discussions with other thinkers. He finally decided to find his own path to realization and meditated for days on end under a peepal tree at Bodh Gaya in Bihar, where he attained enlightenment. After that, he was known as the Buddha or the Wise One. He then went to Sarnath, near Varanasi, where he taught for the first time. He spent the rest of his life traveling on foot, going from place to place, teaching people, till he passed away at Kusinara. The Buddha taught that life is full of suffering and unhappiness. This is caused because we have cravings and desires, which often cannot be fulfilled. Sometimes, even if we get what we want, we are not satisfied and want even more or want other things. The Buddha described this as thirst or tanha. He taught that this constant craving could be removed by following moderation in everything. He also taught people to be kind and to respect the lives of others, including animals. He believed that the results of our actions, called karma, whether good or bad, affect us both in this life and the next. The Buddha taught in the language of the ordinary people, Prakrit, so that everybody could understand his message. What was the language used to compose the Vedas? He also encouraged people to think for themselves rather than to simply accept what he said. Let us see how he did this.
The image shows a stupa located in Sarnath. This structure marks the location where Buddha imparted his teachings initially. Further information about stupas can be found in another chapter. Stupas are significant monuments in Buddhism, often containing relics and serving as places of meditation and veneration.
The story of Kisigatami. Here is a famous story about the Buddha. Once there was a woman named Kisigatami whose son had died. She was so sad that she roamed through the streets of the city carrying the child with her, asking for help to bring him back to life. A kind man took her to the Buddha. The Buddha said, "Bring me a handful of mustard seeds, and I will bring your child back to life." Kisigatami was overjoyed and started off at once, but the Buddha gently stopped her and added, "The seeds must come from the house of a family where nobody has died." Kisigatami went from door to door, but wherever she went, she found out that someone or the other, father, mother, sister, brother, husband, wife, child, uncle, aunt, grandfather, grandmother, had died. What was the Buddha trying to teach the sorrowing mother? Upanishads. Around the time that the Buddha was preaching, and perhaps a little earlier, other thinkers also tried to find answers to difficult questions. Some of them wanted to know about life after death, others wanted to know why sacrifices should be performed. Many of these thinkers felt that there was something permanent in the universe that would last even after death. They described this as the Atman, or the individual soul, and the Brahman, or the universal soul. They believed that ultimately, both the Atman and the Brahman were one. Many of their ideas were recorded in the Upanishads. These were part of the later Vedic texts. Upanishad literally means approaching end. 6 schools of Indian philosophy. 6 schools of Indian philosophy. Over centuries, India's intellectual exploration of truth has come to be represented by 6 systems of philosophy. These are known as Vaisheshika, Nyaya, Samkhya, Yoga, Purva Mimamsa, and Vedanta or Uttara Mimamsa. These 6 systems of philosophy are said to have been founded by sages Kanada, Gautama, Kapila, Patanjali, Jaimini, and Vyasa, respectively. These philosophies still guide scholarly discourse in the country. German-born British Indologist Friedrich Max Müller has observed that the 6 systems of philosophy were developed over many generations with contributions made by individual thinkers. However, today, we find an underlying harmony in their understanding of truth, although they seem distinct from each other. The Wise Beggar. Here is a dialogue based on a story from one of the most famous Upanishads, the Chandogya Upanishad. Shaunaka and Abhipararin were 2 sages who worshipped the universal soul. Once, as they sat down to eat, a beggar came and asked for some food. "We cannot spare anything for you," Shaunaka said. "Learned sirs, whom do you worship?" the beggar asked. "The universal soul," Abhipararin replied. "Ah, it means that you know that the universal soul fills the entire world." "Yes, yes, we know that," the sages nodded. "If the universal soul fills the whole world, it fills me too. Who am I but a part of the world?" the beggar asked. "You speak the truth, O young Brahmin. Then, O sages, by not giving me food, you are actually denying food to the universal soul." The sages realized the truth of what the beggar said and shared their food with him. How did the beggar convince the sages to share their food with him? Sitting near, and the texts contain conversations between teachers and students. Often, ideas were presented through simple dialogues. Most Upanishadic thinkers were men, especially Brahmins and Rajas. Occasionally, there is mention of women thinkers, such as Gargi, who was famous for her learning, and participated in debates held in royal courts. Poor people rarely took part in these discussions. One famous exception was Satyakama Jabala, who was named after his mother, the slave woman Jabali. He had a deep desire to learn about reality, was accepted as a student by a Brahmin teacher named Gautama, and became one of the best-known thinkers of the time. Many of the ideas of the Upanishads were later developed by the famous thinker Shankaracharya, about whom you will read in Class 7. Panini, the grammarian. Panini, the grammarian. This was also the time when other scholars were at work. One of the most famous was Panini, who prepared a grammar for Sanskrit. He arranged the vowels and the consonants in a special order, and then used these to create formulae like those found in algebra. He used these to write down the rules of the language in short formulae, around 3,000 of them. Jainism. The last and 24th Tirthankara of the Jainas, Vardhamana Mahavira, also spread his message around this time, that is 2,500 years ago. He was a Kshatriya prince of the Licchavis, a group that was part of the Vaj Sangha, about which you read in Chapter 6. At the age of 30, he left home and went to live in a forest. For 12 years he led a hard and lonely life, at the end of which he attained enlightenment. He taught a simple doctrine: men and women who wish to know the truth must leave their homes. They must follow very strictly the rules of ahimsa, which means not hurting or killing living beings. All beings, said Mahavira, long to live. To all things life is dear. Ordinary people could understand the teachings of Mahavira and his followers because they used Prakrit. There were several forms of Prakrit, used in different parts of the country and named after the regions in which they were used. For example, the Prakrit spoken in Magadha was known as Magadhi. Followers of Mahavira, who were known as Jainas, had to lead very simple lives, begging for food. They had to be absolutely honest and were especially asked not to steal. Also, they had to observe celibacy, and men had to give up everything, including their clothes. Jaina. The word Jaina comes from the term Jinna, meaning conqueror. Why do you think the term Jinna was used for Mahavira? It was very difficult for most men and women to follow these strict rules. Nevertheless, thousands left their homes to learn and teach this new way of life. Many more remained behind and supported those who became monks and nuns, providing them with food. Jainism was supported mainly by traders. Farmers, who had to kill insects to protect their crops, found it more difficult to follow the rules. Over hundreds of years, Jainism spread to different parts of North India and to Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. The teachings of Mahavira and his followers were transmitted orally for several centuries. They were written down in the form in which they are presently available at a place called Vallabhi in Gujarat about 1500 years ago. See Map 7, page 113. The Sangha. Both the Mahavira and the Buddha felt that only those who left their homes could gain true knowledge. They arranged for them to stay together in the Sangha, an association of those who left their homes. The rules made for the Buddhist Sangha were written down in a book called the Vinaya Pitaka. From this, we know that there were separate branches for men and women. All men could join the Sangha. However, children had to take the permission of their parents and slaves that of their masters. Those who worked for the king had to take his permission and debtors that of creditors. Women had to take their husband's permission. Men and women who joined the Sangha led simple lives. They meditated for most of the time and went to cities and villages to beg for food during fixed hours. That is why they were known as bhikkhus, the Prakrit word for renouncer, beggar, and bhikkhunis. They taught others and helped one another. They also held meetings to settle any quarrels that took place within the Sangha. Those who joined the Sangha included Brahmins, Kshatriyas, merchants, laborers, barbers, courtesans, and slaves. Many of them wrote down the teachings of the Buddha. Some of them also composed beautiful poems describing their life in the Sangha. List at least 2 ways in which the Sangha described in this lesson was different from the one mentioned in Chapter 6. Were there any similarities? Monasteries. To begin with, both Jaina and Buddhist monks went from place to place throughout the year, teaching people. The only time they stayed in one place was during the rainy season, when it was very difficult to travel. Then, their supporters built temporary shelters for them in gardens, or they lived in natural caves in hilly areas. As time went on, many supporters of the monks and nuns, and they themselves, felt the need for more permanent shelters, and so monasteries were built. These were known as viharas. The earliest viharas were made of wood and then of brick. Some were even in caves that were dug out in hills, especially in western India. A Buddhist text tells us, just as the waters of rivers lose their names and separateness when they flow into the mighty ocean, so are varna and ranks and family forgotten when the followers of the Buddha join the order of monks. Very often, the land on which the vihara was built was donated by a rich merchant or a landowner, or the king. The local people came with gifts of food, clothing, and medicines for the monks and nuns. In return, they taught the people. Over the centuries, Buddhism spread to many parts of the subcontinent and beyond. You will learn more about this in Chapter 10.
Figure summary: the image shows a cave hollowed out in the hills of Karl, present-day Maharashtra. The cave served as a shelter where monks and nuns resided and meditated. The structure appears to be a permanent dwelling, suggesting a shift from temporary shelters to more permanent monastic residences. The image suggests that the monks and nuns preferred to live in natural caves in hilly areas.
The system of ashramas. Around the time when Jainism and Buddhism were becoming popular, Brahmins developed the system of ashramas. Here, the word ashrama does not mean a place where people live and meditate. It is used instead for a stage of life. 4 ashramas were recognized: Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Samnyasa. Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Vaisya men were expected to lead simple lives and study the Vedas during the early years of their life, Brahmacharya. Then they had to marry and live as householders, Grihastha. Then they had to live in the forest and meditate, Vanaprastha. Finally, they had to give up everything and become Samnyasins. The system of ashramas allowed men to spend some part of their lives in meditation. Generally, women were not allowed to study the Vedas, and they had to follow the ashramas chosen by their husbands. In what way was the system of ashramas different from life in the Sangha? What are the varnas mentioned here? Were all 4 varnas allowed to participate in the system of ashramas? Elsewhere. Find Iran in your atlas. Zoroaster was an Iranian prophet. His teachings are contained in a book called the Avesta. The language of the Avesta and the practices described in it are very similar to those of the Vedas. The basic teachings of Zoroaster are contained in the maxim, good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. Here is a verse from the Zend Avesta. Lord, grant strength and the rule of truth and good thinking, by means of which one shall create peace and tranquility. For more than 1,000 years, Zoroastrianism was a major religion in Iran. Later, some Zoroastrians migrated from Iran and settled down in the coastal towns of Gujarat and Maharashtra. They were the ancestors of today's Parsis. Imagine you want to go to listen to one of the preachers who lived about 2,500 years ago. Describe your conversation with your parents as you try to persuade them to let you go. Let's recall one. Describe the ways in which the Buddha tried to spread his message to the people too. Write whether true or false. A. The Buddha encouraged animal sacrifices. B. Sarnath is important because it was the place where the Buddha taught for the first time. C. The Buddha taught that karma has no effect on our lives. D. The Buddha attained enlightenment at Bodh Gaya. Keyword Stanha, Prakrit Upanishadatman Brahmanahimsa, Jainsingh Habhikuvahara Monastery Ashramas. Some important dates. Upanishadic thinkers, the Jaina teacher Mahavira and the Buddha, about 2,500 years ago, writing down of the Jaina texts, about 1,500 years ago, Upanishadic thinkers believed that the Atman and Brahman were ultimately one. 3. What were the questions that Upanishadic thinkers wanted to answer? 4. What were the main teachings of the Mahavira? Let's discuss. 5. Why do you think Anagha's mother wanted her to know the story of the Buddha? 6. Do you think it would have been easy for slaves to join the Sangha? Give reasons for your answer. Let's do. 7. Make a list of at least 5 ideas and questions mentioned in this lesson. Choose 3 from the list and discuss why you think they are important even today. 8. Find out more about men and women who renounce the world today. Where do they live? What kinds of clothes do they wear? What do they eat? Why do they renounce the world? Chapter 8 ASHOKA, the emperor who gave up war. Roshan's rupees. Roshan clutched the crisp notes that her grandfather had given her on her birthday. While she badly wanted to buy a new CD, she also wanted to just see and feel the brand new notes. It was then that she noticed that all of them had a smiling face of Gandhiji printed on the right and a tiny set of lions on the left. What were the lions there for, she wondered. A very big kingdom, equivalent an empire. The lions that we see on our notes and coins have a long history. They were carved in stone and placed on top of a massive stone pillar at Sarnath, about which you read in Chapter 7. Ashoka was one of the greatest rulers known to history, and on his instructions, inscriptions were inscribed on pillars, as well as on rock surfaces. Before we find out what was written in these inscriptions, let us see why his kingdom was called an empire. The empire that Ashoka ruled was founded by his grandfather, Chandragupta Maurya, more than 2,300 years ago. Chandragupta was supported by a wise man named Chanakya or Kautilya. Many of Chanakya's ideas were written down in a book called the Arthashastra.
Image summary. The image shows a girl in school uniform. The girl is smiling and looking at the camera. The image is related to a story about a girl named Roshan who received money for her birthday and noticed the image of Gandhi and the lions on the notes. The image shows a sculpture. The sculpture is the lion capital. The lion capital was placed on top of a massive stone pillar at Sarnath. The lions on our notes and coins have a long history and are derived from the same lion capital.
Dynasty. When members of the same family become rulers one after another, the family is often called a dynasty. The Mauryas were a dynasty with 3 important rulers: Chandragupta, his son Bindusara, and Bindusara's son, Ashoka. The places where inscriptions of Ashoka have been found are marked with red dots. These were included within the empire. Name the countries where Ashokan inscriptions have been found. Which Indian states were outside the empire? There were several cities in the empire, marked with black dots on the map. These included the capital Pataliputra, Taxila, and Ujjain. Taxila was a gateway to the northwest, including Central Asia, while Ujjain lay on the route from north to south India. Merchants, officials, and craftspersons probably lived in these cities. In other areas, there were villages of farmers and herders. In some areas, such as central India, there were forests where people gathered forest produce and hunted animals for food. People in different parts of the empire spoke different languages. They probably ate different kinds of food and wore different kinds of clothes as well.
Map 5 Summary. This is a map depicting the Mauryan Empire, highlighting principal cities and locations where inscriptions were discovered. The map illustrates the geographical extent of the empire, showing the distribution of inscriptions and important cities. Inscriptions are more concentrated in certain regions, while important cities are positioned strategically across the empire.
How are empires different from kingdoms? Emperors need more resources than kings because empires are larger than kingdoms and need to be protected by big armies, so also they need a larger number of officials who collect taxes. Ruling the empire. As the empire was so large, different parts were ruled differently. The area around Pataliputra was under the direct control of the emperor. This meant that officials were appointed to collect taxes from farmers, herders, craftspersons, and traders who lived in villages and towns in the area. Officials also punished those who disobeyed the ruler's orders. Many of these officials were given salaries. Messengers went to and fro, and spies kept a watch on the officials. And of course, the emperor supervised them all, with the help of members of the royal family and senior ministers. There were other areas or provinces. Each of these was ruled from a provincial capital, such as Taxila or Ujjain. Although there was some amount of control from Pataliputra, and royal princes were often sent as governors, local customs and rules were probably followed. Besides, there were vast areas between these centers. Here the Mauryas tried to control roads and rivers, which were important for transport, and to collect whatever resources were available as tax and tribute. For example, the Arthashastra tells us that the northwest was important for blankets and South India for its gold and precious stones. It is possible that these resources were collected as tribute. Tribute. Unlike taxes, which were collected on a regular basis, tribute was collected as and when it was possible from people who gave a variety of things, more or less willingly. There were also the forested regions. People living in these areas were more or less independent, but may have been expected to provide elephants, timber, honey, and wax to Mauryan officials. The emperor and the capital city. Megasthenes was an ambassador who was sent to the court of Chandragupta by the Greek ruler of West Asia named Seleucus Nicator. Megasthenes wrote an account about what he saw. Here is a part of his description. The occasions on which the emperor appears in public are celebrated with grand royal processions. He is carried in a golden palanquin. His guards ride elephants decorated with gold and silver. Some of the guards carry trees on which live birds, including a flock of trained parrots, circle about the head of the emperor. The king is normally surrounded by armed women. He is afraid that someone may try to kill him. He has special servants to taste the food before he eats. He never sleeps in the same bedroom for 2 nights. And about Pataliputra, modern Patna, he wrote, "This is a large and beautiful city. It is surrounded by a massive wall. It has 570 towers and 64 gates. The houses, of 2 and 3 stories, are built of wood and mud brick. The king's palace is also of wood and decorated with stone carvings. It is surrounded with gardens and enclosures for keeping birds." Why do you think the king had special servants to taste the food he ate? In what ways was Pataliputra different from Mohenjo-daro? Hint, see Chapter 4. Ashoka, a unique ruler. Ashoka, a unique ruler. The most famous Mauryan ruler was Ashoka. He was the first ruler who tried to take his message to the people through inscriptions. Most of Ashoka's inscriptions were in Prakrit and were written in the Brahmi script. Ashoka's war in Kalinga. Ashoka's war in Kalinga. Kalinga is the ancient name of coastal Orissa. See Map 5, page 76. Ashoka fought a war to conquer Kalinga. However, he was so horrified when he saw the violence and bloodshed that he decided not to fight any more wars. He is the only king in the history of the world who gave up conquest after winning a war. Ashoka's inscription, describing the Kalinga War. This is what Ashoka declared in one of his inscriptions. 8 years after becoming king, I conquered Kalinga. About 1.5 lakh people were captured, and more than 1 lakh of people were killed. This filled me with sorrow. Why? Whenever an independent land is conquered, lakhs of people die, and many are taken prisoner. Brahmins and monks also die. People who are kind to their relatives and friends, to their slaves and servants die, or lose their loved ones. That is why I am sad, and have decided to observe Dhamma and to teach others about it as well. I believe that winning people over through Dhamma is much better than conquering them through force. I am inscribing this message for the future, so that my son and grandson after me should not think about war. Instead, they should try to think about how to spread Dhamma. How did the Kalinga War bring about a change in Ashoka's attitude towards war? Dhamma is the Prakrit word for the Sanskrit term dharma. What was Ashoka's Dhamma? Ashoka's Dhamma did not involve worship of a god or performance of a sacrifice. He felt that just as a father tries to teach his children, he had a duty to instruct his subjects. He was also inspired by the teachings of the Buddha, chapter 7. There were a number of problems that troubled him. People in the empire followed different religions, and this sometimes led to conflict. Animals were sacrificed. Slaves and servants were ill-treated. Besides, there were quarrels in families and amongst neighbors. Ashoka felt it was his duty to solve these problems. So, he appointed officials, known as the Dhamma Mahamata, who went from place to place teaching people about Dhamma. Besides, Ashoka got his messages inscribed on rocks and pillars, instructing his officials to read his message to those who could not read it themselves. Ashoka also sent messengers to spread ideas about Dhamma to other lands, such as Syria, Egypt, Greece, and Sri Lanka. Try and identify these on Map 6, pages 84 to 85. He built roads, dug wells, and built rest houses. Besides, he arranged for medical treatment for both human beings and animals.
The image is a photograph of a finely polished stone sculpture of the Rampurwa bull. The sculpture was originally part of a Marian pillar found in Rampurwa, Bihar, and is currently located in Rashtrapati Bhavan. The sculpture exemplifies the skill of the sculptors of the Marian period.
Ashoka's messages to his subjects. People perform a variety of rituals when they fall ill, when their children get married, when children are born, or when they go on a journey. These rituals are not useful. If instead people observe other practices, this would be more fruitful. What are these other practices? These are being gentle with slaves and servants, respecting one's elders, treating all creatures with compassion, giving gifts to Brahmins and monks. It is both wrong to praise one's own religion or criticize another's. Each one should respect the other's religion. If one praises one's own religion while criticizing another's, one is actually doing greater harm to one's own religion. Therefore, one should try to understand the main ideas of another's religion and respect it. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, wrote, "His edicts, instructions, still speak to us in a language we can understand, and we can still learn much from them." Identify the parts of Ashoka's message that you think are relevant today.
The image shows different scripts derived from Brahmi script. The image displays the letter, written in various scripts, including early Brahmi, Devanagari, Hindi, Bengali, Malayalam, and Tamil. The scripts have evolved from the Brahmi script over a long period of time.
Elsewhere, somewhat before the time of the Mauryan Empire, about 2,400 years ago, emperors in China began building the Great Wall. It was meant to protect the northern frontier of the empire from pastoral people. Additions to the wall were made over a period of 2,000 years because the frontiers of the empire kept shifting. The wall is about 6,400 kilometers long and is made of stone and brick, with a road along the top. Several thousand people worked to build the wall. There are watchtowers all along, at distances of about 100–200 m. In what ways do you think Ashoka's attitude toward neighboring peoples was different from that of the Chinese emperors?
Image summary. The image shows the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall was built to protect the northern frontier of the empire from pastoral people. The wall is made of stone and brick, with a road along the top.
Imagine you live in Kalinga, and your parents have suffered in the war. Messengers from Ashoka have just arrived with the new ideas about Dhamma. Describe the dialogue between them and your parents. Let's recall. 1. Make a list of the occupations of the people who lived within the Mauryan Empire. 2. Complete the following sentences. A. Officials collected from the area under the direct control of the ruler. B. Royal princes often went to the provinces as C. The Mauryan rulers tried to control, and which were important for transport. D. People in forested regions provided the Mauryan officials with. 3. State whether true or false. A. Ujjain was the gateway to the northwest. C. Chandragupta's ideas were written down in the Arthashastra. D. Kalinga was the ancient name of Bengal. E. Most Ashokan inscriptions are in the Brahmi script. Let's discuss. 4. What were the problems that Ashoka wanted to solve by introducing Dhamma? 5. What were the means adopted by Ashoka to spread the message of Dhamma? 6. Why do you think slaves and servants were ill-treated? Do you think the orders of the emperor would have improved their condition? Give reasons for your answer. Let's do. 7. Write a short paragraph explaining to Roshan why the lions are shown on our currency notes. List at least one other object on which you see them. 8. Suppose you had the power to inscribe your orders, what 4 commands would you like to issue? Empire Capital Province Dhamma Messenger Official. Some important dates. Beginning of the Mauryan Empire, more than 2,300 years ago. Based on the Times Atlas of World History.
Map 6 Summary. The image is a map that depicts important trade routes, including the Silk Route. The map illustrates the geographical span of various empires and kingdoms, such as the Roman Empire, Persia, and the Kingdom of Axum, along with the routes they controlled. The Chinese rulers and the Kushanas controlled certain land routes, while the Roman emperors controlled sea routes. The rulers of Iran also had control over some land routes. The sea routes were crucial for trade and connected different regions. Image Summary. The image is a map that depicts probable Chinese routes. The map shows a vast geographical area encompassing regions from modern-day India to parts of Central Asia and China. It illustrates several land and sea routes connecting various cities and regions. These routes appear to facilitate trade and cultural exchange across the continent. The sea routes extend from the Indian coast towards Southeast Asia, while land routes traverse through Central Asian regions, linking different empires and kingdoms.
Looking ahead. The Mauryan Empire collapsed about 2,200 years ago. In its place, and elsewhere, rose several new kingdoms. In the northwest, and in parts of North India, kings known as the Indo-Greeks ruled for about 100 years. They were followed by a Central Asian people known as the Shokas, who set up kingdoms in the northwest, north, and western India. Some of these kingdoms lasted for about 500 years, till the Shokas were defeated by the Gupta kings, chapter 11. The Shokas in turn were followed by the Kushanas, about 2,000 years ago. You will learn more about the Kushanas in chapter 10. In the north, and in parts of central India, a general of the Mauryas, named Pushyamitra Shunga, set up a kingdom. The Shungas were followed by another dynasty, known as the Kanvas, and by rulers from other families till the establishment of the Gupta Empire about 1,700 years ago. The Shokas, who ruled over parts of western India, fought several battles with the Satavahanas, who ruled over western and parts of central India. The Satavahana kingdom, which was established about 2,100 years ago, lasted for about 400 years. Around 1,700 years ago, a new ruling family, known as the Vakatakas, became powerful in central and western India. In South India, the Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas ruled between 2,200 and 1,800 years ago. And, about 1,500 years ago, there were 2 large kingdoms, those of the Pallavas and the Chalukyas. There were several other kingdoms and kings as well. We know about them from their coins and inscriptions, as well as from books. There were other changes that were taking place, in which ordinary men and women played a major role. These included the spread of agriculture and the growth of new towns, craft production, and trade. Traders explored land routes within the subcontinent and outside, and sea routes to West Asia, East Africa, and Southeast Asia, see Map 6, were also opened up. And many new buildings were built, including the earliest temples and stupas, books were written, and scientific discoveries were made. These developments took place simultaneously, that is at the same time. Keep this in mind as you read the rest of the book.
Figure summary. The figure shows a coin from the Indo-Greek kingdom. The coin contains the image of a person's head and some inscriptions. This coin provides insight into the rulers and the culture during that period. An Indo-Greek coin is shown in the image. The coin has a figure depicted on it, along with some inscriptions. From the presence of the coin, it can be inferred that Indo-Greeks ruled in the northwest, north, and western India. A Kashana coin summary. This is an image of a Kashana coin. It depicts the profile of a person with symbols around the head. The coin provides insight into the artistic and cultural elements during the Kashana rule. ASHOKA coin summary. The image shows a ASHOKA coin. The coin provides information about the kingdoms and kings that existed approximately 1 to 2,000 years ago. These kingdoms are known from their coins and inscriptions, as well as from books. The presence of ASHOKA coins indicates the influence and rule of the Shakas in the northwest and western parts of India during that period.
Chapter 9 Vital Villages, Thriving Towns. Prabhakar at the blacksmith's shop. Prabhakar at the blacksmith's shop. Prabhakar sat watching the smiths at the local shop. There was a small bench on which iron tools like axes and sickles were laid out, ready for sale. A bright fire was burning, and 2 men were heating and beating metal rods into shape. It was very hot and noisy, and yet it was fascinating to watch what was happening. Iron tools and agriculture. We often take the use of iron for granted today. Things made of iron and steel are a part of our daily lives. The use of iron began in the subcontinent around 3,000 years ago. Some of the largest collections of iron tools and weapons were found in the megalithic burials, about which you read in Chapter 5. Around 2,500 years ago, there is evidence for the growing use of iron tools. These included axes for clearing forests and the iron plowshare. As we had seen, Chapter 6, the plowshare was useful for increasing agricultural production. Other steps to increase production, irrigation. Other steps to increase production, irrigation. The kings and kingdoms you have been reading about could not have existed without the support of flourishing villages. While new tools and the system of transplantation, Chapter 6, increased production, irrigation was also used. Irrigation works that were built during this time included canals, wells, tanks, and artificial lakes. If you look at the chart, you will find that some of the stages in the construction of irrigation works are mentioned. Fill in the rest by using the following phrases. Labor is provided by the people. Farmers also benefit because crop production is more. Certain farmers have to increase production to pay taxes. Kings provide money and plan irrigation works. 2. They demand taxes from farmers. 4. This is possible with irrigation. 6-8. So does revenue.
Image summary. The image depicts a boy holding a tool, possibly related to iron work or agriculture, given the context of iron tools and increasing agricultural production. The image suggests a connection between the use of iron tools and the lives of people in villages and towns. The tools are essential for various activities, including agriculture and craftsmanship. The image shows a collection of iron tools. The tools include a pair of tongs, an axe, and a sickle. These tools represent the types of iron implements that were in use around 2,500 years ago and were important for agriculture and other activities. Unlabeled summary. The table outlines a cyclical relationship between kings, farmers, and irrigation. Kings require funds for various needs, leading them to demand taxes from farmers. To meet these demands, farmers must increase production, which is facilitated by irrigation. Kings then provide resources and planning for irrigation works, which in turn leads to more certain and increased crop production, ultimately boosting revenue for the kings.
Who lived in the villages? There were at least 3 different kinds of people living in most villages in the southern and northern parts of the subcontinent. In the Tamil region, large landowners were known as Vellalar, ordinary plowmen were known as Ujavar, and landless laborers, including slaves, were known as Kadasiar and Adamai. In the northern part of the country, the village headman was known as the Grama Bijaka**. Usually, men from the same family held the position for generations. In other words, the post was hereditary. The Grama Bijaka* was often the largest landowner. Generally, he had slaves and hired workers to cultivate the land. Besides, as he was powerful, the king often used him to collect taxes from the village. He also functioned as a judge and sometimes as a policeman. Apart from the *Gramophijaka*, there were other independent farmers, known as *Grihapatis*, most of whom were smaller landowners. And then there were men and women such as the *Dasa Karmakara*, who did not own land and had to earn a living working on the fields owned by others. In most villages, there were also some craftspersons such as the blacksmith, potter, carpenter, and weaver. The earliest Tamil compositions. Some of the earliest works in Tamil, known as *Sangam literature, were composed around 2300 years ago. These texts were called *Sangam because they were supposed to have been composed and compiled in assemblies, known as *Sangams, of poets that were held in the city of Madurai, see Map 7, page 113. The Tamil terms mentioned above are found in Sangam literature. Finding out about cities, stories, travelers, sculpture, and archaeology. You may have heard of the Jatakas. These were stories that were probably composed by ordinary people and then written down and preserved by Buddhist monks. Here is part of a Jataka story, which tells us how a poor man gradually became rich. The clever poor man. Once upon a time, there was a clever poor young man who lived in a city. His only resource was a dead rat. He started off by selling it for a coin to a hotel for their cat. Then one day, there was a storm. The king's garden was littered with branches and leaves, and the gardener was at a loss as to how to clear the mess. The young man offered to clean the garden if he could keep the wood and leaves. The gardener agreed at once. The young man rounded up all the children who were playing, with an offer of sweets for every stick and leaf that they could collect. In no time, every scrap had been neatly piled near the entrance. Just then, the king's potter was on the lookout for fuel with which to bake his pots, so he took the whole lot and paid the young man for it. Our young man now thought of another plan. He carried a jar full of water to the city gate and offered water to 500 grass cutters. They were pleased and said, "You have done us a good turn. Tell us, what can we do for you?" He replied, "I'll let you know when I need your help." He then made friends with a trader. One day, the trader told him, "Tomorrow, a horse dealer is coming to town with 500 horses." Hearing this, our young man went back to the grass cutters. He said, "Please give me a bundle of grass each, and don't sell your grass till mine is sold." They agreed and gave him 500 bundles of grass. When the horse dealer could not buy grass anywhere else, he purchased the young man's grass for 1,000 coins. List the occupations of the persons mentioned in the story. For each one, try and decide whether they would have lived A. only in the city, B. only in villages, C. in both cities and villages. Why do you think the horse dealer was coming to the city? Do you think women could have taken up the occupations mentioned in the story? Give reasons for your answer. Facing page, ring well found in Delhi. In what ways do you think this system of drainage was different from that of the Harappans? We can use other kinds of evidence to find out about life in some of these early cities. Sculptors carved scenes depicting people's lives in towns and villages, as well as in the forest. Many of these sculptures were used to decorate railings, pillars, and gateways of buildings that were visited by people. Below, a sculpture from Sanchi. This is a sculpture from Sanchi, a site with stupas in Madhya Pradesh showing the scene in a city. You will learn more about Sanchi in Chapter 12. Notice the way walls are shown. Are they made of brick, wood, or stone? Now look at the railings. Are they made of wood? Describe the roofs of the buildings. Many of the cities that developed from about 2,500 years ago were capitals of the Mahajanapadas that you learnt about in Chapter 6. As we had seen, some of these cities were surrounded by massive fortification walls. In many cities, archaeologists have found rows of pots or ceramic rings arranged one on top of the other. These are known as ring wells. These seem to have been used as toilets in some cases and as drains and garbage dumps. These ring wells are usually found in individual houses. We have hardly any remains of palaces, markets, or of homes of ordinary people. Perhaps some are yet to be discovered by archaeologists. Others, made of wood, mud brick and thatch, may not have survived. Another way of finding out about early cities is from the accounts of sailors and travelers who visited them. One of the most detailed accounts that has been found was by an unknown Greek sailor. He described all the ports he visited. Find Baruch on map 7, page 113, and then read his description of the city.
Image summary. The image shows a photograph of ring wells found in Delhi. These wells appear to be constructed from ceramic rings stacked on top of each other. These wells were likely used for various purposes such as toilets, drains, or garbage disposal. The ring wells are typically found within individual houses. Image summary. The image shows a sculpture from Sanchi in Madhya Pradesh. The sculpture depicts a scene in a city. The walls are shown, as well as the railings and roofs of buildings. The sculpture contains complex layering of people and animals.
The story of Baragaza, the Greek name for Baruch. The gulf is very narrow at Baragaza, and very hard to navigate for those coming from the sea. Ships had to be steered in by skillful and experienced local fishermen who were employed by the king. The imports into Baragaza were wine, copper, tin, lead, coral, topaz, cloth, gold, and silver coins. Exports from the town included plants from the Himalayas, ivory, agate, carnelian, cotton, silk, and perfumes. Special gifts were brought by merchants for the king. These included vessels of silver, singing boys, beautiful women, fine wines, and fine cloth. Make a list of all the things imported and exported from Baragaza. Underline at least 2 things that were not in use during Harappan times. Why do you think merchants brought gifts for the king? Punch-marked coins. Punch-marked coins were generally rectangular or sometimes square or round in shape, either cut out of metal sheets or made out of flattened metal globules, a small spherical body. The coins were not inscribed, but were stamped with symbols using dies or punches. Hence, they are called punch-marked coins. These coins are found over most parts of the subcontinent and remained in circulation till the early centuries CE. Coins. You may have noticed how wealth is measured in terms of coins in the story on page 90. Archaeologists have found several thousands of coins belonging to this period. The earliest coins which were in use for about 500 years were punch-marked coins, such as the one shown below.
The image shows punch-marked coins. These coins, discovered by archaeologists, represent a form of currency used extensively throughout the subcontinent for approximately 5 centuries. The coins are characterized by their stamped symbols, which were applied using dies or punches, and their general shape is either rectangular, square, or round.
Other means of exchange. Read this short poem from the Sangam collection. As they carry the white paddy of their land to exchange it for the salt of another, crossing the long roads in carts, through sands white as moonlight, taking whole families who hate to be left behind, the departure of the salt merchants leaves the city empty. Salt was produced plentifully along the sea coast. What are the merchants planning to exchange it with? How are they traveling? Cities with many functions. Very often, a single town was important for a variety of reasons. Let us look at the example of Mathura, map 7, page 113. Mathura has been an important settlement for more than 2,500 years. It was important because it was located at the crossroads of 2 major routes of travel and trade from the northwest to the east and from north to south. There were fortifications around the city and several shrines. Farmers and herders from adjoining areas provided food for people in the city. Mathura was also a center where some extremely fine sculpture was produced. Around 2,000 years ago, Mathura became the second capital of the Kushanas, about whom you will be reading in Chapter 10. Mathura was also a religious center. There were Buddhist monasteries, Jaina shrines, and it was an important center for the worship of Krishna. Several inscriptions on surfaces, such as stone slabs and statues, have been found in Mathura. Generally, these are short inscriptions, recording gifts made by men and sometimes women to monasteries and shrines. These were made by kings and queens, officers, merchants, and craftspersons who lived in the city. For instance, inscriptions from Mathura mention goldsmiths, blacksmiths, weavers, basket makers, garland makers, perfumers. Make a list of the occupations of people who lived in Mathura. List one occupation that was not practiced in Harappan cities. Crafts and craftspersons. We also have archaeological evidence for crafts. These include extremely fine pottery, known as the Northern Black Polished Ware, NBPW. It gets its name from the fact that it is generally found in the northern part of the subcontinent. Northern Black Polished Ware, NBPW. NBPW is a hard, wheel-made, metallic-looking ware with a shiny black surface. The potter used to expose the earthenware to very high temperature in his kiln, which resulted in the blackening of its outer surface. A fine black slip was also applied on this, which gave the pottery a mirror-like shine. Remember that the archaeological evidence for many crafts may not have survived. We know from texts that the manufacture of cloth was important. There were famous centers such as Varanasi in the north and Madurai in the south. Both men and women worked in these centers. Many craftspersons and merchants now formed associations known as shrenis. These shrenis of craftspersons provided training, procured raw material, and distributed the finished product. Then shrenis of merchants organized the trade. Shrenis also served as banks, where rich men and women deposited money. This was invested, and part of the interest was returned or used to support religious institutions such as monasteries. Rules for spinning and weaving. These rules are from the Arthashastra, mentioned in Chapter 8. They describe how spinning and weaving could be done in workshops under the supervision of a special official. Widows, young women who are differently abled, nuns, mothers of courtesans, retired women servants of the king, women who have retired from service in temples, may be used for processing wool, bark, cotton, hemp, and flax. They should be paid according to the quality and quantity of work. Women who are not permitted to leave their homes can send maidservants to bring the raw material from the superintendent and take the finished work back to him. Women who can visit the workshop should go at dawn to give their work and receive their wages. There should be enough light to examine the work. In case the superintendent looks at the woman or talks about anything other than the work, he should be punished. If a woman does not complete her work, she will have to pay a fine, and her thumbs can be cut off. Make a list of all the women who could be employed by the superintendent. Do you think women would have faced any problems while working? A closer look Arakamdu. A closer look, Arakamdu find Arakamdu in Puducherry on map 7, page 113, and read the box on Rome on page 96. Between 2200 and 1900 years ago, Arakamdu was a coastal settlement where ships unloaded goods from distant lands. A massive brick structure, which may have been a warehouse, was found at the site. Other finds include pottery from the Mediterranean region, such as amphorae, tall double-handled jars that contained liquids such as wine or oil, and stamped red-glazed pottery, known as earthenware, which was named after a city in Italy. This was made by pressing wet clay into a stamped mold. There was yet another kind of pottery which was made locally, though Roman designs were used. Roman lamps, glassware, and gems have also been found at the site. Tamil Brahmi inscriptions. Several pieces of pottery have inscriptions in Brahmi, which was used to write Tamil. Small tanks have been found that were probably dyeing vats, used to dye cloth. There is plenty of evidence for the making of beads from semi-precious stones and glass. List the evidence that indicates that there was contact with Rome.
Image summary. The image shows pieces of pottery with Tamil Brahmi inscriptions. These inscriptions are written in Brahmi, which was used to write Tamil. The pottery provides evidence of the language and writing systems used in the region during that time.
Elsewhere. Find Rome on map 6, page 84. This is one of the oldest cities in Europe and developed around the same time as the cities in the Ganga Valley. Rome was the capital of one of the largest empires, one that spread across Europe, North Africa, and West Asia. Augustus, one of the most important emperors, who ruled about 2,000 years ago, said that he found Rome a city of brick and made it into a city of marble. He and later rulers built temples and palaces. They also built huge amphitheaters, open arenas surrounded by tiers of seats, where citizens could watch all kinds of shows, and public baths with separate timings for men and women, where people met and relaxed. Huge aqueducts, channels to supply water, were built to bring water to the city for the baths, fountains, and toilets. Why do you think the amphitheaters and aqueducts have survived?
An aqueduct summary. This is an image of an aqueduct. Aqueducts were channels built to supply water to cities for baths, fountains, and toilets. They are large structures that have survived for a long time. Amphitheaters have also survived for a long time.
Imagine you live in Baragaza and are visiting the port. Describe what you would see there. Let's recall. 1. Fill in the blanks. A was a word used for large landowners in Tamil. B. The Grama-Pajaka often got his land cultivated by the C. Plowmen were known as in Tamil. D. Most Grihapatis were landowners. 2. Describe the functions of the Grama-Pajaka. Why do you think he was powerful? 3. List the craftspersons who would have been present in both villages and cities. 4. Choose the correct answer. A. Ring wells were used for 1. Bathing. 2. Washing clothes. 3. Irrigation. 4. Drainage. B. Punch-marked coins were made of 1. Silver. 2. Gold. 3. Tin. 4. Ivory. Beginning of the use of iron in the subcontinent about 3,000 years ago. Increase in the use of iron, cities, punch-marked coins, about 2,500 years ago. Beginning of the composition of Sangam literature, about 2,300 years ago. Settlement in Arakamdu between 2,200 and 1,900 years ago. C. Mathura was an important 1. Village. 2. Port. 3. Religious center. 4. Forested area. D. Shrenis were associations of 1. Rulers. 2. Craftspersons. 3. Farmers. 4. Herders. Let's discuss. 5. Which of the iron tools shown on page 87 would have been important for agriculture? What would the other tools have been used for? 6. Compare the drainage system in your locality with that of the cities mentioned in the lesson. What similarities and differences do you notice? Let's do. 7. If you have seen craftspersons at work, describe in a short paragraph what they do. Hint. How do they get the raw materials? What kind of equipment do they use? How do they work? What happens to the finished product? 8. List the functions performed by men and women who live in your city or village. In what ways are these similar to those performed by people who lived in Mathura? In what ways are they different? Traders, kings, and pilgrims. Jajini at the market. Jajini looked forward to the fair in the village. She loved to see and touch the pots and pans of shiny steel, bright plastic buckets, cloth printed with brilliant floral designs, and clockwork toys, all of which came from the city. The men who spread out their wares came in buses and trucks and went back at the end of the day. Why were they always on the move? She wondered. Her mother explained that they were traders, people who bought things where they were made and sold them elsewhere.
Image summary. This is an image of a young girl smiling. The image is associated with a text about a girl named Jajini who is at the market. The text describes trade and traders.
How to find out about trade and traders. You read about the northern black polished ware in Chapter 9. This fine pottery, especially bowls and plates, were found from several archaeological sites throughout the subcontinent. How do you think it reached these places? Traders may have carried them from the places where they were made to sell them at other places. South India was famous for gold, spices, especially pepper, and precious stones. Pepper was particularly valued in the Roman Empire, so much so that it was known as black gold. So, traders carried many of these goods to Rome in ships, across the sea, and by land in caravans. There must have been quite a lot of trade as many Roman gold coins have been found in South India. Can you think of how and why these reached India? A poem about trade. We can find evidence of trade in the Sangam poems. Here is one which describes the goods brought into Puhar, an important port on the east coast. Here are brought swift, prancing horses by sea and ships, bales of black pepper in carts, gems and gold borne in the Himalayas, sandalwood borne in the western hills, the pearls of the southern seas and corals from the eastern oceans, the yield of the Ganga and the crops from the Kaveri, foodstuffs from Sri Lanka, pottery from Myanmar, and other rare and rich imports. Make a list of all the things that are mentioned. What would they be used for? Traders explored several sea routes. Some of these followed the coasts. There were others across the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal, where sailors took advantage of the monsoon winds to cross the seas more quickly. So, if they wanted to reach the western coast of the subcontinent from East Africa or Arabia, they chose to sail with the southwest monsoon. And sturdy ships had to be built for these long journeys. New kingdoms along the coasts. The southern half of the subcontinent is marked by a long coastline and with hills, plateaus, and river valleys. Amongst the river valleys, that of the Kaveri is the most fertile. Chiefs and kings who controlled the river valleys and the coasts became rich and powerful. Sangam poems mention the Muvendar. This is a Tamil word meaning three chiefs, used for the heads of three ruling families, the Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas. See Map 7, page 113, who became powerful in South India around 2300 years ago. Each of the three chiefs had two centers of power, one inland and one on the coast. Of these 6 cities, 2 were very important: Puhar or Kavaripattinam, the port of the Cholas, and Madurai, the capital of the Pandyas. The chiefs did not collect regular taxes. Instead, they demanded and received gifts from the people. They also went on military expeditions and collected tribute from neighboring areas. They kept some of the wealth and distributed the rest amongst their supporters, including members of their family, soldiers, and poets. Many poets whose compositions are found in the Sangam collection composed poems in praise of chiefs who often rewarded them with precious stones, gold, horses, elephants, chariots, and fine cloth. Around 200 years later, a dynasty known as the Satavahanas became powerful in western India. See Map 7, page 113. The most important ruler of the Satavahanas was Gautamiputra Shri Satakarni. We know about him from an inscription composed on behalf of his mother, Gautami Balashri. He and other Satavahanan rulers were known as lords of the Dakshinapatha, literally the route leading to the south, which was also used as a name for the entire southern region. He sent his army to the eastern, western, and southern coasts. Why do you think he wanted to control the coasts? The story of the Silk Route. The rich, glossy colors of silk, as well as its smooth texture, make it a highly valued fabric in most societies. Making silk is a complicated process. Raw silk has to be extracted from the cocoons of silkworms, spun into thread, and then woven into cloth. Techniques of making silk were first invented in China around 7,000 years ago. While the methods remained a closely guarded secret for thousands of years, some people from China who went to distant lands on foot, horseback, and on camels carried silk with them. The paths they followed came to be known as the Silk Route. Sometimes, Chinese rulers sent gifts of silk to rulers in Iran and West Asia, and from there, the knowledge of silk spread further west. About 2,000 years ago, wearing silk became the fashion amongst rulers and rich people in Rome. It was very expensive, as it had to be brought all the way from China, along dangerous roads, through mountains and deserts. People living along the route often demanded payments for allowing traders to pass through. Look at Map 6, pages 84 to 85, which shows the Silk Route and its branches. Some kings tried to control large portions of the route. This was because they could benefit from taxes, tributes, and gifts that were brought by traders traveling along the route. In return, they often protected the traders who passed through their kingdoms from attacks by robbers. The best known of the rulers who controlled the Silk Route were the Kushanas, who ruled over Central Asia and northwest India around 2,000 years ago. Their 2 major centers of power were Peshawar and Mathura. Taxila was also included in their kingdom. During their rule, a branch of the Silk Route extended from Central Asia down to the seaports at the mouth of the river Indus, from where silk was shipped westwards to the Roman Empire. The Kushanas were amongst the earliest rulers of the subcontinent to issue gold coins. These were used by traders along the Silk Route. Why do you think it would have been difficult to use carts along the Silk Route? Silk was also sent from China by sea. Trace the routes on Map 6, pages 84 to 85. What do you think would have been the advantages and problems in transporting silk by sea? The spread of Buddhism. The most famous Kushana ruler was Kanishka, who ruled around 1900 years ago. He organized a Buddhist council where scholars met and discussed important matters. Ashokasha, a poet who composed a biography of the Buddhacharita, lived in his court. Ashokasha and other Buddhist scholars now began writing in Sanskrit. A new form of Buddhism, known as Mahayana Buddhism, now developed. This had 2 distinct features. Earlier, the Buddha's presence was shown in sculpture by using certain signs. For instance, his attainment of enlightenment was shown by sculptures of the peepal tree. Now, statues of the Buddha were made. Many of these were made in Mathura, while others were made in Taxila. The second change was a belief in bodhisattvas. These were supposed to be persons who had attained enlightenment. Once they attained enlightenment, they could live in complete isolation and meditate in peace. However, instead of doing that, they remained in the world to teach and help other people. The worship of bodhisattvas became very popular and spread throughout Central Asia, China, and later to Korea and Japan. Buddhism also spread to Western and Southern India, where dozens of caves were hollowed out of hills for monks to live in. Some of these caves were made on the orders of kings and queens, others by merchants and farmers. These were often located near passes through the Western Ghats. Roads connecting prosperous ports on the coast with cities in the Deccan ran through these passes. Traders probably halted in these cave monasteries during their travels. Buddhism also spread southeastwards to Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, and other parts of Southeast Asia, including Indonesia. The older form of Buddhism, known as Theravada Buddhism, was more popular in these areas. Read page 100 once more. Can you think of how Buddhism spread to these lands?
Image summary. The image is a sculpture from Sanchi. The sculpture depicts the attainment of enlightenment. Sculptors carved the tree and the empty seat below it to indicate that Buddha had attained enlightenment while meditating under the tree. The image shows two images of Buddha. One image depicts Buddha from Matsura, while the other portrays Buddha from Taxila. The images are meant to be compared to find similarities and differences between the two representations of Buddha. A cave at Karl, Maharashtra. Image summary. The image shows a cave at Karl, Maharashtra. The cave has a large arched entrance with intricate carvings. Inside the cave there is a stupa, a dome-shaped structure that is a significant symbol in Buddhism. The presence of the stupa suggests that the cave served as a Buddhist religious site. The architecture and design of the cave reflect the artistic and religious traditions of the time.
The quest of the pilgrims. As traders journeyed to distant lands in caravans and ships, pilgrims often traveled with them. Pilgrims are men and women who undertake journeys to holy places in order to offer worship. The best known of these are the Chinese Buddhist pilgrims, Faxian, who came to the subcontinent about 1600 years ago, Xuanzang, who came around 1400 years ago, and Aiqing, who came about 50 years after Xuanzang. They came to visit places associated with the life of the Buddha as well as famous monasteries. Each of these pilgrims left an account of his journey. They wrote of the dangers they encountered on their travels, which often took years, of the countries and the monasteries that they visited, and the books they carried back with them. How Faxian returned to China. Faxian began his journey back home from Bengal. He boarded a ship belonging to some merchants. They had barely traveled for 2 days when they were caught in a storm. The merchants began throwing their merchandise overboard so as to lighten the load and save the ship from sinking. Faxian threw away his meager personal belongings, but clung to his books and the statues of the Buddha that he had collected. Finally, the storm subsided after 13 days. This is how he describes the sea. The sea itself is boundless in extent. It is impossible to know east or west, except by observing the sun, moon, or stars in their motions. If it is dark, rainy weather, the only plan is to steer by the wind. It took him more than 90 days to reach Java, where he halted for 5 months, before boarding another merchant ship that took him to China. Try and trace the route Faxian took on map 6, page 85. Why do you think he did not want to throw away his books and statues? Xuanzang, who took the land route back to China, through the northwest, and Central Asia, carried back with him statues of the Buddha made of gold, silver, and sandalwood, and over 600 manuscripts loaded on the backs of 20 horses. Over 50 manuscripts were lost when the boat on which he was crossing the Indus capsized. He spent the rest of his life translating the remaining manuscripts from Sanskrit into Chinese. Nalanda, a unique center of Buddhist learning. Xuanzang and other pilgrims spent time studying in Nalanda, Bihar, the most famous Buddhist monastery of the period. This is how he describes it. The teachers are men of the highest ability and talent. They follow the teachings of the Buddha in all sincerity. The rules of the monastery are strict, and everyone has to follow them. Discussions are held throughout the day, and the old and the young mutually help one another. Learned men from different cities come here to settle their doubts. The gatekeeper asks new entrants difficult questions. They are allowed to enter only after they have been able to answer these. 7 or 8 out of every 10 are not able to answer. List the reasons why Xuanzang wanted to study in Nalanda. The beginning of Bhakti. This was also the time when the worship of certain deities, which became a central feature of later Hinduism, gained in importance. These deities included Shiva, Vishnu, and goddesses such as Durga. These deities were worshipped through bhakti, an idea that became very popular at this time. Bhakti is generally understood as a person's devotion to his or her chosen deity. Anybody, whether rich or poor, belonging to the so-called high or low castes, man or woman, could follow the path of bhakti. The idea of bhakti is present in the Bhagavad Gita, a sacred book of the Hindus, which is included in the Mahabharata, see chapter 12. In this, Krishna, the god, asks Arjuna, his devotee and friend, to abandon all dharmas and take refuge in him, as only he can set Arjuna free from every evil. This form of worship gradually spread to different parts of the country. Those who followed the system of bhakti emphasized devotion and individual worship of a god or goddess, rather than the performance of elaborate sacrifices. According to this system of belief, if a devotee worships the chosen deity with a pure heart, the deity will appear in the form in which he or she may desire. So, the deity could be thought of as a human being, lion, tree, or any other form. Once this idea gained acceptance, artists made beautiful images of these deities. Bhakti comes from the Sanskrit term *baj*, meaning to divide or share. This suggests an intimate, two-way relationship between the deity and the devotee. Bhakti is directed towards Bhagavat, which is often translated as God, but also means one who possesses and shares *, literally good fortune or bliss. The devotee, known as the *bhakta or the Bhagavata *, shares his or her chosen deity's *bhaga*.
Vishnu as Varaha image summary. The image is a statue of Vishnu in his Varaha or boar incarnation. According to religious texts, Vishnu assumed the form of a boar to save the earth, which had been submerged in water. In the image, the earth is depicted as a woman. The statue is a representation of a specific form of Vishnu.
A poem by a Bhakta. Most bhakti literature tells us that riches, learning, and high status do not automatically ensure a close relationship with the deity. This is part of a poem composed in Tamil by Appar, a devotee of Shiva, who lived about 1400 years ago. Appar was a Velala, chapter 9. The leper with rotting limbs, the man who is regarded as low by the Brahmin, even the scavenger, even these men, if they are servants, i.e. devotees of him who shelters the Ganga in his long hair, i.e. Shiva, I worship them, they are gods to me. What does the poet regard as more valuable, social status or devotion? Because the deities were special, these images of the deity were often placed within special homes, places that we describe as temples. You will learn more about these temples in chapter 12. Bhakti inspired some of the best expressions in art, sculpture, poetry, and architecture. Hindu. The word Hindu, like the term India, is derived from the river Indus. It was used by Arabs and Iranians to refer to people who lived to the east of the river and to their cultural practices, including religious beliefs. Elsewhere, about 2,000 years ago, Christianity emerged in West Asia. Jesus Christ was born in Bethlehem, which was then part of the Roman Empire. Christ's teachings were that he was the savior of the world. He also taught people to treat others with love and trust others, just as they themselves wanted to be treated. Here are a few verses from the Bible, the holy book that contains the teachings of Christ. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Christ's teachings appealed to ordinary people and spread through West Asia, Africa, and Europe. The first Christian preachers came from West Asia to the west coast of the subcontinent within 100 years of Christ's death. Look at map 6, pages 84 to 85, and trace out the route that they may have used. The Christians of Kerala, known as Syrian Christians because they probably came from West Asia, are amongst the oldest Christian communities in the world. Imagine, you have a manuscript which a Chinese pilgrim would like to carry back with him. Describe your conversation. Let's recall. 1. Match the following. Muindar Mahayana Buddhism Lords of the Dakshinapatha Buddhacharita Ashvakosha, Satavahana rulers Bodhisattvas Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas. Some important dates. Discovery of silk making, about 7,000 years ago. The Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas, about 2,300 years ago. Growing demand for silk in the Roman Empire, about 2,000 years ago. Kanishka, the Kushana ruler, about 1,900 years ago. Fa Xian comes to India, about 1,600 years ago. Xuanzang comes to India, Appar composes devotional poems in praise of Shiva, about 1,400 years ago, too. Why did kings want to control the Silk Route? 3. What kinds of evidence do historians use to find out about trade and trade routes? 4. What were the main features of bhakti? Let's discuss. 5. Discuss the reasons why the Chinese pilgrims came to India. 6. Why do you think ordinary people were attracted to bhakti? Let's do. 7. List 5 things that you buy from the market. Which of these are made in the city village in which you live and which are brought by traders from other areas? 8. There are several major pilgrimages performed by people in India today. Find out about any one of them and write a short description. Hint. Who can go on the pilgrimage, men, women, or children? How long does it take? How do people travel? What do they take with them? What do they do when they reach the holy place? Do they bring anything back with them? New empires and kingdoms. Arvind plays a king. Arvind plays a king. Arvind had been chosen to act as a king in the school play. He had expected to march solemnly in splendid robes, to twirl his mustaches and wield the silver paper-wrapped sword with gusto. Imagine his surprise when he was told he would also have to sit and play a veena and recite poetry. A musician king? Who was that? He wondered.
Image summary. The image is a portrait of a young boy. The boy is smiling and looking directly at the camera. He is wearing a collared shirt. The image is likely included to visually represent the character Arvind mentioned in the adjacent text, who is playing the role of a king in a school play.
Prashastis and what they tell us. Arvind was supposed to be acting as Samudragupta, a famous ruler of a dynasty known as the Guptas. We know about Samudragupta from a long inscription inscribed on the Ashokan pillar at Allahabad. It was composed as a kavya by Harishina, who was a poet and a minister at the court of Samudragupta. This inscription is of a special kind known as a prashasti, a Sanskrit word, meaning in praise of. While prashastis were composed for some of the rulers you read about in Chapter 10, such as Gautamiputra, Shri Satakarni, they became far more important from the time of the Guptas. Samudragupta's prashasti. Samudragupta's prashasti. Let us see what Samudragupta's prashasti tells us. The poet praised the king in glowing terms, as a warrior, as a king who won victories in battle, who was learned and the best of poets. He is also described as equal to the gods. The prashasti was composed in very long sentences. Here is part of one such sentence. Samudragupta the warrior, whose body was most charming, being covered with the plenteous beauty of the marks of hundreds of scars caused by battle axes, arrows, spikes, spears, barbed darts, swords, iron clubs, javelins, barbed arrows, long arrows, and many other weapons. What does this description tell you about the king, and also about how kings fought wars?
Image summary. The image shows a coin depicting Samudragupta playing the veena. The text mentions that this coin showcases some of Samudragupta's other qualities. It suggests that Samudragupta was interested in music. Image summary. The image depicts a coin that showcases some qualities of Samudragupta, specifically his musical talent. The coin portrays him playing the veena, suggesting his appreciation for the arts alongside his capabilities as a warrior and ruler. This contrasts with descriptions of him as a warrior, highlighting a more cultured side to his persona.
The king who played the veena. Some other qualities of Samudragupta are shown on coins such as this one, where he is shown playing the veena. If you look at map 7, page 113, you will notice an area shaded in green. You will also find a series of red dots along the east coast, and you will find areas marked in purple and blue as well. This map is based on the information provided in the prashasti. Harishina describes 4 different kinds of rulers and tells us about Samudragupta's policies towards them. 1. The rulers of Aryavarta, the area shaded in green on the map. Here there were 9 rulers who were uprooted, and their kingdoms were made a part of Samudragupta's empire. 2. The rulers of Dakshinapatha. Here there were 12 rulers, some of whose capitals are marked with red dots on the map. They surrendered to Samudragupta after being defeated, and he then allowed them to rule again. 3. The inner circle of neighboring states, including Assam, coastal Bengal, Nepal, and a number of Ghana Sangas, remember Chapter 6 in the northwest, marked in purple on the map. They brought tribute, followed his orders, and attended his court. 4. The rulers of the outlying areas, marked in blue on the map, perhaps the descendants of the Kushanas and Shokas, and the ruler of Sri Lanka, who submitted to him and offered daughters in marriage. Find Prayaga, the old name for Allahabad, Ujjain and Pataliputra, Patna, on the map. These were important centers of the Gupta rulers. What was the difference between the way in which Samudragupta treated the rulers of Aryavarta and Dakshinapatha? Can you suggest any reasons for this difference?
Map 7 Summary. This is a map illustrating important cities and kingdoms. The map depicts the geographical locations of inner states, outer states, and Aryavarta, differentiating them based on their political relationships. The map also indicates cities, including those conquered by the Guptas. The inner states appear more centrally located, while the outer states are situated at the periphery. Aryavarta occupies a significant portion of the northern region. The cities conquered by the Guptas are positioned along the southeastern coast.
Vikram Samvat. Vikram Samvat, the era beginning in the 58 BCE, is traditionally associated with Gupta king, Chandragupta II, who had founded it as a mark of victory over the Shokas and assumed the title of Vikramaditya. The Vikram Samvat has also been adopted alongside the Gregorian calendar as the national calendar by independent India. Genealogies. Genealogies. Most Prashastis also mention the ancestors of the ruler. This one mentions Samudragupta's great-grandfather, grandfather, father, and mother. His mother, Kumara Devi, belonged to the Licchavi, while his father, Chandragupta, was the first ruler of the Gupta dynasty to adopt the grand title of Maharajadhiraja, a title that Samudragupta also used. His great-grandfather and grandfather are mentioned simply as Maharajas. It seems as if the family gradually rose to importance. Arrange these titles in order of importance. Raja, Maharajadhiraja, Maharaja. Samudragupta in turn figures in the genealogies, lists of ancestors of later rulers of the dynasty, such as his son, Chandragupta II. We know about him from inscriptions and coins. He led an expedition to western India, where he overcame the last of the Shokas. According to later belief, his court was full of learned people, including Kalidasa the poet and Aryabhata the astronomer, about whom you will read more in Chapter 12. Harshavardhana and the Harshacharita. Harshavardhana and the Harshacharita. While we can learn about the Gupta rulers from their inscriptions and coins, we can find out about some kings from biographies. Harshavardhana, who ruled nearly 1400 years ago, was one such ruler. His court poet, Banabhata, wrote his biography, the Harshacharita, in Sanskrit. This gives us the genealogy of Harsha and ends with his becoming king. Xuanzang, about whom you read in Chapter 10, also spent a lot of time at Harsha's court and left a detailed account of what he saw. Harsha was not the eldest son of his father, but became king of Thainsar after both his father and elder brother died. His brother-in-law was the ruler of Kannauj, see Map 7, and he was killed by the ruler of Bengal. Harsha took over the kingdom of Kannauj and then led an army against the ruler of Bengal. Although he was successful in the east and conquered both Magadha and Bengal, he was not as successful elsewhere. He tried to cross the Nirmada to march into the Deccan, but was stopped by a ruler belonging to the Chalukya dynasty, Pulakshin II. Look at Map 8, page 136, and list the present-day states which Harshavardhana passed through when he went A to Bengal and B up to the Nirmada. The Pallavas, Chalukyas, and Pulakshin's Prashasti. The Pallavas and Chalukyas were the most important ruling dynasties in South India during this period. The kingdom of the Pallavas spread from the region around their capital, Kanchipuram, to the Kaveri Delta, while that of the Chalukyas was centered around the Rachur Doab, between the rivers Krishna and Tungabhadra. Aihole, the capital of the Chalukyas, was an important trading center, see Map 7. It developed as a religious center, with a number of temples. The Pallavas and Chalukyas frequently raided one another's lands, especially attacking the capital cities, which were prosperous towns. The best-known Chalukya ruler was Pulakshin II. We know about him from a prashasti, composed by his court poet Ravikiyati. This tells us about his ancestors, who are traced back through 4 generations from father to son. Pulakshin evidently got the kingdom from his uncle. According to Ravikiyati, he led expeditions along both the west and the east coasts. Besides, he checked the advance of Harsha. There is an interesting play of words in the poem. Harsha means happiness. The poet says that after this defeat, Harsha was no longer Harsha. Pulakshin also attacked the Pallava king, who took shelter behind the walls of Kanchipuram. But the Chalukya victory was short-lived. Ultimately, both the Pallavas and the Chalukyas gave way to new rulers belonging to the Rashtrakuta and Chola dynasties, about which you will study in Class 7. Who were the other rulers who tried to control the coasts and why? Hint, see Chapter 10. How were these kingdoms administered? As in the case of earlier kings, land revenue remained important for these rulers, and the village remained the basic unit of administration. There were some new developments as well. Kings adopted a number of steps to win the support of men who were powerful, either economically or socially, or because of their political and military strength. For instance, some important administrative posts were now hereditary. This means that sons succeeded fathers to these posts. For example, the poet Harishina was a Mahadandanyaka, or chief judicial officer, like his father. Sometimes, one person held many offices. For instance, besides being a Mahadandanyaka, Harishina was a Kumaramadio, meaning an important minister, and a Sandhai Vigrahika, meaning a minister of war and peace. Besides, important men probably had a say in local administration. These included the Nagara Shreshthi, or chief banker, or merchant of the city, the Sarthavaha, or leader of the merchant caravans, the Prathamakulika, or the chief craftsman, and the head of the Kayasthas, or scribes. These policies were reasonably effective, but sooner or later, some of these powerful men grew strong enough to set up independent kingdoms. What do you think may have been the advantages and disadvantages of having hereditary officers? A new kind of army. Like earlier rulers, some of these kings maintained a well-organized army with elephants, chariots, cavalry, and foot soldiers. Besides, there were military leaders who provided the king with troops whenever he needed them. They were not paid regular salaries. Instead, some of them received grants of land. They collected revenue from the land and used this to maintain soldiers and horses and provide equipment for warfare. These men were known as Samantas. Whenever the ruler was weak, Samantas tried to become independent. Assemblies in the southern kingdoms. The inscriptions of the Pallavas mention a number of local assemblies. These included the Sabha, which was an assembly of Brahmin landowners. This assembly functioned through subcommittees, which looked after irrigation, agricultural operations, making roads, local temples, etc. The was a village assembly found in areas where the landowners were not Brahmins, and the Nagaram was an organization of merchants. It is likely that these assemblies were controlled by rich and powerful landowners and merchants. Many of these local assemblies continued to function for centuries. Ordinary people in the kingdoms. We can catch an occasional glimpse of the lives of ordinary people from plays and other accounts. Let us look at some of these. Kalidasa is known for his plays depicting life in the king's court. An interesting feature about these plays is that the king and most Brahmins are shown as speaking Sanskrit, while women and men other than the king and Brahmins use Prakrit. His most famous play, Abhainana Shakuntalam, is the story of the love between a king named Dushyanta and a young woman named Shakuntala. We find an interesting description of the plight of a poor fisherman in this play. A fisherman finds a ring. A fisherman found a precious ring, which the king had given to Shakuntala, but which had been accidentally swallowed by a fish. When he went to the palace with it, the gateman accused him of theft, and the chief police officer was rather rude. However, the king was happy when he saw the ring and sent a reward for the fisherman. Then, the police officer and the gateman decided to take a share of the reward and went along with the fisherman to have a drink. Do you think that if a poor man finds something and reports this to the police, he would be treated like this today? Name a famous man who taught in Prakrit and a king who issued inscriptions in Prakrit. Hint. See chapters 7 and 8. The Chinese pilgrim Fa Xian noticed the plight of those who were treated as untouchables by the high and mighty. They were expected to live on the outskirts of the city. He writes, "If such a man enters a town or a marketplace, he strikes a piece of wood in order to keep himself separate. People, hearing this sound, know what it means and avoid touching him or brushing against him." And Banabata provides us with a vivid picture of the king's army on the move. The king's army. The king traveled with an enormous amount of equipment. Apart from weapons, there were things of daily use such as pots, pans, furniture, golden footstools, food, including animals such as goat, deer, rabbits, vegetables, spices, carried on carts or loaded on to pack animals such as camels and elephants. This huge army was accompanied by musicians beating drums and others playing horns and trumpets. Villagers had to provide hospitality along the way. They came with gifts of curds, gore, and flowers, and provided fodder for the animals. They also tried to meet the king and place their complaints and petitions before him. The army left a trail of destruction behind. Elephants often trampled down the huts of villagers, and the oxen yoked to the caravans of merchants ran away, scared by the tumult. As Banabata says, the whole world was swallowed up in dust. Make a list of all the things that were carried with the army. What did the villagers bring for the king? Elsewhere. Find Arabia on map 6, pages 84 to 85. Although it is a desert, it was at the hub of communications for centuries. In fact, Arab merchants and sailors played an important role in the sea trade between India and Europe, see page 100. Others who lived in Arabia were the Bedouins, pastoral tribes depending mainly on camels, hardy animals that could survive in the desert. Around 1400 years ago, Prophet Muhammad introduced a new religion, Islam, in Arabia. Like Christianity, Islam was a religion that laid stress on the equality and unity of all before Allah, the one supreme God. Here is a verse from the Quran, the sacred book of Islam. For Muslim men and women, for believing men and women, for devout men and women, for true men and women, for men and women who are patient and constant, for men and women who humble themselves, for men and women who give in charity, for men and women who fast, for men and women who guard their chastity, and for men and women who engage much in Allah's remembrance. For them has Allah prepared forgiveness and great reward. Within 100 years, Islam spread to North Africa, Spain, Iran, and India. Arab sailors, who were already familiar with the coastal settlements of the subcontinent, now brought the new religion with them. Arab soldiers conquered Sindh, in present-day Pakistan, about 1,300 years ago. Trace the routes that would have been taken by these sailors and soldiers on map 6. Imagine. Harshavardhana's army will visit your village next week. Your parents are preparing for the visit. Describe what they say and do. Let's recall. 1. State whether true or false. A. Harishina composed a prashasti in praise of Gautamiputra Shri Satakarni. B. The rulers of Aryavarta brought tribute for Samudragupta. C. There were 12 rulers in Dakshinapatha. D. Taxila and Madurai were important centers under the control of the Gupta rulers. E. Ahole was the capital of the Pallavas. F. Local assemblies functioned for several centuries in South India. 2. Mention 3 authors who wrote about Harshavardhana. 3. What changes do you find in the army at this time? 4. What were the new administrative arrangements during this period? Let's discuss. 5. What do you think Arvind would have to do if he was acting as Samudragupta? 6. Do you think ordinary people would have read and understood the prashastis? Give reasons for your answer. Let's do. 7. If you had to make a genealogy for yourself, who are the people you would include in it? How many generations would you like to show? Make a chart and fill it. 8. How do you think wars affect the lives of ordinary people today? Some important dates. Beginning of the Gupta dynasty, about 1700 years ago. The rule of Harshavardhana, about 1400 years ago. Chapter 12 Buildings, Paintings and Books.
Image summary. The image shows a child walking with crutches. The child is on a dirt path and appears to be walking outside.
Marudasamy and the Iron Pillar. Marudasamy was so excited. His brother had propelled his wheelchair all along the dusty, stony path, past the towering Quip Minar, and up the metal ramp. It had been tough, but now he was here, in front of the famous iron pillar. It was an unforgettable experience. Metallurgy. Ancient Indian metallurgists made major contributions to the metallurgical history of the world. Archaeological excavations have shown that the Harappans were master craftsmen and had knowledge of copper metallurgy. They even manufactured bronze by mixing copper and tin. While the Harappans belonged to the Bronze Age, their successors belonged to the Iron Age. India produced highly advanced types of iron-forged iron, wrought iron, and cast iron. The Iron Pillar. The Iron Pillar at Mehrauli, Delhi, is a remarkable example of the skill of Indian craftspersons. It is made of iron, 7.2 m high, and weighs over 3 tons. It was made about 1,500 years ago. We know the date because there is an inscription the Iron Pillar on the pillar mentioning a ruler named Chandra, who probably belonged to the Gupta dynasty, chapter 11. What is amazing is the fact that the pillar has not rusted in all these years.
The image shows a pillar. This pillar is located in Delhi and is a remarkable example of the skill of Indian craftspersons. The pillar is made of iron, is more than 7 meters high, and weighs over 3 tons. The pillar was made approximately 1,500 years ago. The pillar has not rusted in all these years.
Buildings in brick and stone. The skills of our craftspersons are also apparent in the buildings that have survived, such as stupas. The word stupa means a mound. While there are several kinds of stupas, round and tall, big and small, these have certain common features. Generally, there is a small box placed at the center or heart of the stupa. This may contain bodily remains, such as teeth, bone or ashes of the Buddha or his followers, or things they used, as well as precious stones and coins. This box, known as a relic casket, was covered with earth. Later, a layer of mud brick or baked brick was added on top. And then, the dome-like structure was sometimes covered with carved stone slabs. Often, a path, known as the Pradakshina Patha, was laid around the stupa. This was surrounded with railings. Entrance to the path was through gateways. Devotees walked around the stupa in a clockwise direction as a mark of devotion. Both railings and gateways were often decorated with sculpture. Find Amaravati on map 7, page 113. This was a place where a magnificent stupa once existed. Many of the stone carvings for decorating the stupa were made about 2,000 years ago. Other buildings were hollowed out of rock to make artificial caves. Some of these were very elaborately decorated with sculptures and painted walls. Some of the earliest Hindu temples were also built at this time. Deities such as Vishnu, Shiva, and Durga were worshipped in these shrines. The most important part of the temple was the room known as the Garbhagriha, where the image of the chief deity was placed. It was here that priests performed religious rituals and devotees offered worship to the deity.
Figure summary. The image shows a sculpture from Amaravati. The sculpture depicts a scene with multiple figures, including humans and animals, possibly illustrating a narrative or event. The artwork showcases detailed carving and composition, reflecting the artistic style and cultural context of the time it was created. Figure summary. The image shows a stupa, a significant structure. The stupa has brickwork that may date back to the time of Ashoka. Railings and gateways were added later. Stupas like this one were built over many centuries.
Buildings, paintings, and books. Often, as at Bidurgaon, a tower, known as the Shikara, was built on top of the Garbhagriha to mark this out as a sacred place. Building Shikaras required careful planning. Most temples also had a space known as the Mandapa. It was a hall where people could assemble. Find Mahabalipuram and Aihole on map 7, page 113. Some of the finest stone temples were built in these towns. Some of these are shown here.
Image summary. The figure shows 2 images of temples. One image shows an early temple in Uttar Pradesh, made of baked brick and stone. The other image depicts monolithic temples. The temple in Uttar Pradesh was built earlier than the monolithic temples. Image summary. This image shows the Durga temple at Aihole, which was built approximately 1,400 years ago. The Durga temple is made of stone. The temple has a unique architectural style. The temple has intricate carvings and a distinctive structure.
How were stupas and temples built? There were several stages in building a stupa or a temple. Usually, kings or queens decided to build these as it was an expensive affair. First, good quality stone had to be found, quarried, and transported to the place that was often carefully chosen for the new building. Here, these rough blocks of stone had to be shaped and carved into pillars and panels for walls, floors, and ceilings, and then these had to be placed in precisely the right position. Kings and queens probably spent money from their treasury to pay the craftspersons who worked to build these splendid structures. Besides, when devotees came to visit the temple or the stupa, they often brought gifts, which were used to decorate the buildings. For example, an association of ivory workers paid for one of the beautiful gateways at Sanchi. Among the others who paid for decorations were merchants, farmers, garland makers, perfumers, smiths, and hundreds of men and women who are known only by their names, which were inscribed on pillars, railings, and walls. So when you get a chance to visit any of these buildings, remember how several hundreds of people probably worked to construct and decorate them. Make a diagram like the one on page 88, chapter 9, to show the stages in the building of a temple or stupa.
Left, a Jaina monastery from Orissa summary. This is an image of a 2-story building carved out of rock. The building is a Jaina monastery from Orissa. Jaina monks lived and meditated in these rooms. Image summary. This is a sculpture from the National Museum in New Delhi. The sculpture shows figures that may have been hollowed out from caves. The figures appear to be working or carving, possibly related to the construction or decoration of cave structures. Paintings from Ajanta summary. This is a painting from Ajanta caves. The painting depicts a human figure with ornaments and clothing. The figure seems to be carrying something. The painting showcases the artistic skills and cultural elements of the time.
Painting. Find Ajanta on map 7, page 113. This is a place where several caves were hollowed out of the hills over centuries. Most of these were monasteries for Buddhist monks, and some of them were decorated with paintings. Here are some examples. As the caves are dark inside, most of these paintings were done in the light of torches. The colors, which are vivid even after 1,500 years, were made of plants and minerals. The artists who created these splendid works of art remain unknown.
Image summary. The image shows a painting. The painting is circular and contains several concentric circles with different patterns and designs. The innermost circle contains a figure, while the outer circles are decorated with floral and animal motifs. The painting appears to be from an ancient cave or temple, reflecting the artistry and cultural heritage of the time.
The world of books. Some of the best-known epics were written during this period. Epics are grand, long compositions about heroic men and women and include stories about gods. A famous Tamil epic, the Silappatikaram, was composed by a poet named Ilango around 1800 years ago. It is the story of a merchant named Kovalan, who lived in Puhar and fell in love with a courtesan named Madhavi, neglecting his wife Kannagi. Later, he and Kannagi left Puhar and went to Madurai, where he was wrongly accused of theft by the court jeweler of the Pandya king. The king sentenced Kovalan to death. Kannagi, who still loved him, was full of grief and anger at this injustice, and destroyed the entire city of Madurai. Here is how the poet describes Kannagi's grief. "O witness of my grief, you cannot console me. Is it right that your body, fairer than pure gold, lies unwashed here in the dust? Is it just that in the red glow of the twilight, your handsome chest, framed with a flower wreath, lies thrown down on the bare earth, while I remain alone, helpless and abandoned to despair? Is there no God? Is there no God in this country? Can there be a God in a land where the sword of the king is used for the murder of innocent strangers? Is there no God, no God?" Another Tamil epic, the Manimkalai, was composed by Satyanar around 1400 years ago. This describes the story of the daughter of Kovalan and Madhavi. These beautiful compositions were lost to scholars for many centuries, till their manuscripts were rediscovered about 100 years ago. Other writers, such as Kalidasa, about whom you read in chapter 11, wrote in Sanskrit. Here is a verse from Kalidasa's best-known poem, the Meghajuta, in which a monsoon cloud is imagined to be a messenger between lovers who are separated from one another. See how the poet describes the breeze that will carry the cloud northwards. A cool breeze, delightful as it is touched with the fragrance of the earth swollen by your showers, inhaled deeply by elephants, and causing the wild figs to ripen, will blow gently as you go. Do you think Kalidasa can be described as a lover of nature? Recording and preserving old stories. A number of Hindu religious stories that were in circulation earlier were written down around the same time. These include the Puranas. Purana literally mean old. The Puranas contain stories about gods and goddesses, such as Vishnu, Shiva, Durga, or Parvati. They also contain details on how they were to be worshipped. Besides, there are accounts about the creation of the world and about kings. The Puranas were written in simple Sanskrit verse and were meant to be heard by everybody, including women and Sudras who were not allowed to study the Vedas. They were probably recited in temples by priests, and people came to listen to them. Two Sanskrit epics, the Mahabharata and Ramayana, had been popular for a very long time. Some of you may be familiar with these stories. The Mahabharata is about a war fought between the Kauravas and Pandavas, who were cousins. This was a war to gain control of the throne of the Kurush and their capital, Hastinapura. The story itself was an old one, but was written down in the form in which we know it today, about 1500 years ago. Both the Puranas and the Mahabharata are supposed to have been compiled by Vyasa. The Bhagavad Gita, about which you learnt in Chapter 10, was also included in the Mahabharata. The Ramayana is about Rama, a prince of Kosala who was sent into exile. His wife Sita was abducted by the king of Lanka, named Ravana, and Rama had to fight a battle to get her back. He won and returned to Ayodhya, the capital of Kosala, after his victory. Like the Mahabharata, this was an old story that was now written down. Valmiki is recognized as the author of the Sanskrit Ramayana. There are several versions, many of which are performed, of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, popular amongst people in different parts of the subcontinent. Find out about a version in your state. Stories told by ordinary people. Ordinary people also told stories, composed poems and songs, sang, danced, and performed plays. Some of these are preserved in collections of stories, such as the Jatakas and the Panchatantra, which were written down around this time. Stories from the Jatakas were often shown on the railings of stupas and in paintings in places such as Ajanta. Here is one such story. Once upon a time there was a great monkey king who lived on the banks of the Ganga in the Himalayas with 80,000 followers. They fed on the fruit of a special mango tree, which were very sweet. Such exquisite mangoes did not grow on the plains. One day, a ripe mango fell into the river and floated all the way to Varanasi. There, the king of the city who was bathing in the river found it and was amazed when he tasted it. He asked the foresters of his kingdom whether they could find the tree for him, and they led him all the way to the Himalayas. There, the king and his courtiers had their fill of mangoes. At night, the king discovered that the monkeys were also feasting on the fruit and decided to kill them. However, the king of the monkeys worked out a plan to save his followers. He broke off branches of the mango tree and tied them to form a bridge across the river and held on to one end till all his followers crossed over. Exhausted with the effort, he fell down and lay dying. The human king saw what had happened and tried unsuccessfully to revive the monkey. When he died, the king mourned his death and paid him full respect. This story is shown on a piece of sculpture found from a stupa at Bharhut in central India. Can you identify which parts of the story are shown in the sculpture? Why do you think these were chosen?
Image is a sculpture depicting the story of the Monkey King. The sculpture illustrates different parts of the story, including the monkeys on the mango tree, the human king interacting with the monkeys, and the Monkey King sacrificing himself to save his followers. The sculpture emphasizes the themes of sacrifice, respect, and the interaction between humans and animals. The sculpture shows the key events of the story, highlighting the Monkey King's bravery and the human king's eventual respect for him.
Writing books on science. Writing books on science. This was also the time when Aryabhata, a mathematician and astronomer, wrote a book in Sanskrit known as the Aryabhatiyam. He stated that day and night were caused by the rotation of the Earth on its axis, even though it seems as if the sun is rising and setting every day. He developed a scientific explanation for eclipses as well. He also found a way of calculating the circumference of a circle, which is nearly as accurate as the formula we use today. Varahamihira, Brahmagupta, and Bhaskaracharya were some other mathematicians and astronomers who made several discoveries. Try and find out more about them. 0. While numerals had been used earlier, mathematicians in India now invented a special symbol for 0. This system of counting was adapted by the Arabs and then spread to Europe. It continues to be in use throughout the world. The Romans used a system of counting without using zero. Try and find out more about it. Ayurveda. Ayurveda is a well-known system of health science that was developed in ancient India. The two famous practitioners of Ayurveda in ancient India were Charaka, first 2 centuries CE, and Sushruta, c. 4th century CE, Charak Samhita, written by Charak, is a remarkable book on medicine. In his treatise, Sushruta Samhita, Sushruta speaks about elaborate surgical procedures. Elsewhere paper has become a part of our daily lives. The books we read are printed on paper, and we use paper for writing. Paper was invented in China about 1900 years ago by a man named Kai Lun. He beat plant fibers, cloth, rope, and the bark of trees, soaked these in water, and then pressed, drained, and dried the pulp to create paper. Even today, handmade paper is made through a similar process. Some important dates. Beginning of stupa building, 2300 years ago, Amaravati, 2000 years ago, Kalidasa, 1600 years ago, Iron Pillar, Temple at Bidar, paintings at Ajanta, Aryabhata, 1500 years ago, Durga Temple, 1400 years ago. The technique of making paper was a closely guarded secret for centuries. It reached Korea about 1400 years ago and spread to Japan soon after. It was known in Baghdad about 1800 years ago. From Baghdad it spread to Europe, Africa, and other parts of Asia, including the subcontinent. What were manuscripts in early India made out of? Hint: see Chapter 1. Imagine you are sitting in a mandapa of a temple. Describe the scene around you. Let's recall. 1. Match the following stupa place where the image of the deity is installed: Shikara mound mandapa circular path around the stupa Garbhagriha place in temples where people could assemble Pradakshina Patha tower 2. Fill in the blanks. A. Was a great astronomer. B. Stories about gods and goddesses are found in the C. Is recognized as the author of the Sanskrit Ramayana. D. And are 2 Tamil epics. Let's discuss. 3. Make a list of the chapters in which you find mention of metal working. What are the metals objects mentioned or shown in those chapters? 4. Read the story on page 130. In what ways is the Monkey King similar to or different from the kings you read about in chapters 6 and 11? 5. Find out more and tell a story from one of the epics. Let's do. 6. List some steps that can be taken to make buildings and monuments accessible to differently abled people. 7. Try and list as many uses of paper as you can. 8. If you could visit any one of the places described in this chapter, which would you choose and why? A quick look at dates. Throughout the book, we have used approximate dates to give you a rough idea of when events processes took place, using the year 2000 as our starting point. Generally, the letter C, which stands for the Latin word circa, meaning approximate, is used for such dates. You will find dates written differently in other books that you may use. For instance, for the Paleolithic period, Chapter 2, dates may be mentioned in terms of millions of years ago. Written as MYA, the beginning of farming and herding at Mayagar, Chapter 3. Dates to c. 6000 BC BCE. The Harappan cities flourished between c. 2700 and 1900 BCE. The Rigveda was composed between c. 1500 and 1000 BCE. Mahajanapadas and cities developed in the Ganga Valley, and new ideas associated with the Upanishads. Jainism and Buddhism emerged c. 500 BCE. Alexander invaded the northwest c. 327 to 325 BCE. Chandragupta Maurya became king c. 321 BCE. Ashoka ruled between c. 272, 268 to 231 BCE. The composition of the Sangam texts. c. 300 BCE. 300 CE, the reign of Kanishka. c. 78 to 100 CE, the establishment of the Gupta Empire. c. 320 CE, the compilation of the Jaina texts at the council at Vallabhi. c. 512-521 CE, the rule of Harshavardhana. 606 to 647 CE, Xuan Zhang comes to India. 630 to 643 CE, the rule of Pulakshin II. 609 to 642 CE. In some cases, for example, the date from when Ashoka began to rule, you may find that more than one date is shown. This is because historians have not been able to agree on which is the correct date. Dates with question marks after them indicate that these are uncertain. Next year, you will be studying more about our pasts, looking at the history of the next 1,000 years beginning from the 8th century CE. You will find that while manuscripts, inscriptions, and archaeological evidence, especially from buildings, remain important, there are other kinds of sources. Learn about new kings and kingdoms, including an empire, that of the Mughals. Discover more about architecture, about temples, mosques, gardens, forts, and other buildings. See what was happening in cities, learn about craftspersons and traders, and about urban culture. Find out about hunter-gatherers, herders, and farmers. Learn how religious beliefs and practices changed. And discover how new languages were used to compose songs, poems, and other literary works. In all of this, you will find that while there were several new developments, there were also continuities with the past. Look out for what changed and what remained the same. You have reached the end of the document.